Hello, guys. Tonight we enter the trenches, suffocated by the fog and dirt of the First World War. You are not here as visitors. No, you're soldiers, covered in mud, hungry, and always wet. The first thing that hits you is the smell. A mixture of decomposing meat, spilled sewage, and wet wool that hasn't dried properly since the day it arrived. The shells whistle in the distance, and the ground trembles as if suffering a nervous breakdown. You crouch instinctively, although it probably does no good. A rat the size of a kitten runs past your boots and disappears into the mud wall behind you. Welcome to your new home, a ditch dug into the skin of Europe, shared with thousands of men, none of whom know when or if they will ever get out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan to create a soft background hum, and let's start tonight's journey together. The trench is alive, not figuratively, but literally. It rides with lice, ticks, rats, and things that move just below the surface. The ground is a quagmire of mud and human excrement. The wooden planks, known as duckboards, try to keep your boots above, but mostly they slip like treacherous banana peels. The walls close in. You can't stand without exposing your helmet to snipers. You can't sit comfortably because the mud devours your butt and offers nothing in return. They hand you a rifle, a bayonet, and a vague promise that your sacrifice means something. No one explains exactly what. You are here because someone in a fancy office said your country needed you. They don't mention that the trench is more likely to kill you than the enemy. Conventional history calls this trench warfare, a method of fighting in which progress is measured in centimeters and paid for with liters of blood. What they don't tell you in textbooks is that it also means urinating in rusty cans, eating crackers so hard that you break your teeth, and seeing your friends lose their minds because the sky doesn't stop roaring. You settle into your bunk, which is nothing more than a shallow shelf of damp earth. If you're lucky, the previous occupant has left you a piece of canvas to sleep on. If you're unlucky, he's still there. Historians continue to argue whether trench systems were a brilliant strategy or simply glorified tombs with better signage. What they do agree on is that the conditions were a grotesque parody of civilization. You are expected to write letters home as if you were at summer camp while rats bite the fingers of the dead next to you. At night, the sky lights up with flashes of distant artillery. Sometimes it turns out beautiful in a twisted way, like a fireworks show launched by someone who hates you. The rain doesn't stop, the mud rises, and you begin to understand the terrible truth. This war is not for glory. It's about surviving until breakfast, and then surviving until lunch, and so on until you forget what day it is or that days exist. You wake up to a smell that neither wind nor time can dispel. It is dense, acidic, and personal. It sticks to your clothes, your skin, your lungs. Somewhere nearby, something is decomposing, probably someone, and no one has the time, energy, or opportunity to remove the corpse. It is now part of the trench. You don't even flinch anymore. That's what disturbs you the most. The trench doesn't smell like one thing. It is a bouquet of horrors. Human excrement, unwashed bodies, wet mold, old vomit, rancid sweat, and gunpowder smoke, all steeped in a broth of death. Mix it with a touch of cheap tobacco and wet wool, and you'll have Oda's Western Front. They should bottle it for history museums or for nightmares. You quickly learn that no one talks about the stench unless a new recruit arrives and starts gagging. Then everyone laughs, because if you can't laugh, you'll cry. And cry makes your glasses fog. The latrine is a trench inside of the trench. A shallow hole dug in the ground with a wooden beam across it, so you can precariously balance, as if you were on a tightrope of your dignity. There is no privacy, no cistern, and when the bombings get close, there's no chance of finishing. Maybe you have to run out with your pants down and pray not to star in someone else's death story. To manage the waste, some genius upstairs thought that spreading lime would be helpful. That is not so. All it does is add a new dimension to the smell, like chemical pickles left out in the sun. And that's not counting the overflow of nearby corpses or the drainage that simply doesn't work. When it rains a lot, the latrine floods and the contents go where gravity pulls, usually towards your boots. Historians still argue whether the trench engineers underestimated the drainage needs or simply assumed soldiers wouldn't live long enough to complain. In any case, you are the one who is left with your knees submerged in it. When people say that the trenches were hell on earth, this is what they mean. Not only the bullets and the fear, but the constant and inescapable filth. You try to eat while covering your nose. It's useless. Everything tastes like iron and damp. Anyway, you have become an expert in canned meat and stale cookies served with sewer aroma. Sometimes a rat dies in the latrine and nobody removes it. And you keep going because what else is there to do? Some men burn sulfur or light cigarettes near their noses to try and mask the stench. Others smear menthol under their noses as if it were perfume. It doesn't work. The smell always wins. It gets into the nostrils, settles in, and lives there rent-free. Even when you have a moment of peace, maybe behind the lines or in a nearby barn, you still carry the smell with you. It is impregnated in your puddles, in your soul. The worst thing is that you stop noticing it. And when you stop noticing it, you start to rot like the trench around you. Out here, you don't eat alone. Nobody does. You're always accompanied by rats. Daring, bulbous, and surprisingly well-fed. In some ways, they live a better life than you. They have unlimited access to corpses, crumbs, and discarded rations. They multiply with terrifying efficiency and are not at all shy. They don't run away like city rats do. These look you in the eye, challenging you. Sometimes they do win. Your cookie tin rattles with their interest even before you take off the lid. One of them, let's call her Lieutenant Whiskers, pounces on a piece of meat as if it was hers. You scare her away, but she only retreats a few centimeters and waits. She knows you'll end up looking away eventually. They always do. The trench rats grow fat on meat. Above all, of the dead. Sometimes of the living too. Soldiers too weak to notice the bites. There's a story of a man who fell asleep and woke without half an ear. Another claimed they bit his boot to reach his foot. Historians still argue if those stories were exaggerated or common enough to seem legends. In any case, you stop sleeping deeply not because of the projectiles or nightmares, but because you don't want to be dinner. You try to scare them off with noises, traps, even poison if the quartermaster has some. But the rats are smarter than that. They can sense the rhythm of human fatigue. They know when you're too tired to defend yourself. They wait until your limbs relax and breathing slows. That's when they will attack. And the worst thing is you talk to them out loud, as if they were roommates you didn't choose. Because after weeks in the trench, even bugs start seeming like company. You give them names and tell them stories. Ratatouille bites at your sleeve. The fat bastard watching the latrine trench. Lady Bigoats, who once stole your cigarette and disappeared among sandbags. You are losing your mind, and you're not alone. Some soldiers try adopting cats, but most don't last. Dogs do a bit better, trained as messengers or pets. But even they get skittish. The constant noise, shaking ground, unpredictable gas attacks. No creature thrives here except for the rats. And the lice. Don't forget them. You will know them soon enough. For now, you eat your hardtack while watching a rat drag a human toe from the mud. You pretend that you didn't see it. You chew, swallow, and try not to think about what crawls around the edges of your vision. Somewhere above the trench, life goes onward. The sky turns pink for a moment, as if it were still capable of showing beauty. But underground, everything is gray, writhing, and damp. You crush a rat with your rifle, but feel nothing. Neither guilt nor relief, just exhaustion. Here you aren't the highest link in any food chain. You are somewhere between, trapped between hungry vermin and indifferent death. Your boots haven't dried in weeks now. Not hours, not days, but weeks. You no longer remember what your skin was like. Now it is soft, swollen, pale as a boiled potato, and smells like cheese that has been in the sun for too long. Congratulations. You are cultivating a case of trench foot. It starts innocently, with slight tingling, some stiffness. You blame it on the cold, the mud, or the fact that you haven't changed your socks since the last time someone remembered to send you clean ones. When was that, 2 shifts ago? Time is confusing here. Linear calendars do not survive the Western Front. But then your foot starts to look like it belongs to someone else entirely. Swollen. When you take off your sock, and yes, it comes off, you discover that your toes are gray, white, or stained. Sometimes they ooze, sometimes they don't. In any case, they smell worse than the latrine trench on a warm day. Welcome to trench foot, an ailment so legendary that it has its own section in medical books. Historians still debate whether poor hygiene, poorly fitting boots, or pure desperation were the main causes. Probably all of the above. The field manual says prevention is simple. Keep your feet dry. How nice. Your trench is a deep dish. Water seeps in from below. Rain lashes from above, and mud absorbs everything like an infernal sponge. Wooden walkways help a little, but only until they float or sink. So what do? You stand in the dirt and hope your feet don't rot before your morale does. Doctors will tell you to take off your boots every day. To air your feet, massage them. Maybe change your socks with a partner. In theory, it's good advice. In practice, you don't always have the opportunity. Between guard duty, falling shells, and the glacial cold, taking off your boots is like asking to die for warm toes. Eventually, someone notices you limping. They tell you to go to the doctor. The doctor shrugs. He has seen worse things. He offers you whiskey, bandages, or both. If you're lucky, maybe they'll send you to the rear for a few days. But don't be confident. There's always someone in a worse situation, and the line must be maintained. The real horror. Some men suffer such severe trench foot that the tissue dies. The foot turns black, then green, and then becomes soft like rotten fruit. Amputation becomes the only option. Imagine surviving a bombing, a gas attack, and 5 outbreaks of lice only to lose your foot to damp socks. You wrap your feet in torn rags. You beg a friend to give you a dry rag. You pray that the mud isn't too deep and doesn't soak you again. But deep down, you know it's only a matter of time. Out here, the trench isn't just trying to kill you with bullets. It devours you slowly, starting with your feet. And despite everything, you keep walking, limping, dragging your half-dead feet through the mud. Because orders are orders, and war doesn't stop for a few necrotic toes. Somehow a letter arrives, transported through kilometers of land full of boxes, dodging artillery and incompetence, passing from hand to hand like a sacred relic until it finally reaches your dirty trench. The envelope is damp, the ink smudged, and the handwriting is painfully familiar. For a second, you're not at war. You are at home. You open it with trembling fingers, try not to think about how many others didn't receive theirs or how many letters are still being written to corpses who will never read them. It's from your sister or your girlfriend or your father, who never said much, but suddenly writes pages when there's a war in between. The words are light, even cheerful. They describe a birthday party that you missed, a neighbor who has a new dog, a reminder to stay safe and warm. You try not to laugh. Warm. How funny. You have not felt heat since basic training. Even so, you read it again and again. You fold it carefully and keep it in the driest place you can find, perhaps inside the lining of your helmet or in the inner pocket of your tunic. You need it close, not precisely to maintain morale, but to remind you that you still exist outside of this place, that someone remembers you. Letters are currency in the trenches. The soldiers exchange them, share them, cling to them like lifelines. Even hearing that someone received a letter lifts morale. For a moment, the war seems like a bad dream that could end. That maybe, just maybe, you're going to return. But there is a shadow on each envelope because some letters bring death, the dreaded one with a black border. We regret to inform you that if you are the recipient of one of those letters, you will never be the same. And if it is your mother, your brother, your best friend from school, you may feel that the last thread holding your soul together has just broken. Historians still argue whether the Postal Service was a miracle of war logistics or a cruel joke that fueled emotional ups and downs in a place overwhelmed by trauma. In any case, the mail arrived and was important. Sometimes you answered, scribbling with numb fingers in a broken notebook, try to seem optimistic, as if you were fine and staying strong. You lied a little or a lot, because you did not want them worry, because you yourself wanted to believe it. Because there is nothing more painful than telling the truth. That your trench smells like death. That your boots are falling apart. And that every time you blink, you hope never to open your eyes again. Some soldiers send poems. Others draw caricatures or include pressed flowers if they are lucky enough to find some on their brief trips behind lines. You send a stain of your old handwriting and hope it arrives intact. You hope they read it before the ink fades. You hope it makes them smile. And if you die before your next letter arrives, well, maybe it will still reach them. And maybe that last piece of you will still be alive, carefully folded between kitchen receipts and family recipes. A relic of a war that swallowed too many boys. You're digging again, always digging. The trench never stops moving, collapsing, flooding, eroding, as if it were trying to escape the war too. So you dig. Mud to the left, sandbags to the right, the shovel in your blistered hands, your fingers half numb and black under your nails. You are not building anything. You are maintaining your prison. There's something cruelly symbolic about it. Digging your own grave every day, one shovel after another. Suddenly, the earth trembles. It is not the usual rumble. This one is sharper, more personal. You remain paralyzed. The shovel stays suspended in the air. Then, the whine of a projectile cuts through the clouds like a scream. You barely throw yourself to the ground before an explosion bursts nearby, hitting you with a new avalanche of humid earth. You are not injured, but your ears are buzzing again. You sit up slowly, your heart hitting your ribs as if trying to escape. The bombing has been constant for days, sometimes for hours. This is not just war. It is psychological demolition. They're starting to call it war neurosis. The doctors still don't understand it. Some officers think it's cowardice, not trauma. But you have seen adult men collapse and burst into tears at the sound of a can falling. You have seen men become mute, or even worse, start laughing at projectiles as if they were jokes only they can hear. You know it's real. Historians still argue whether shell shock was neurological, psychological, or both. Some call it the grandfather of modern post-traumatic stress disorder. Others say it was the war itself, reshaping brains like clay under a boot. Whatever the science, you only know this. Your nerves are shattered. Your hands tremble constantly now. You cannot sleep more than 30 minutes without waking startled. Sometimes you wake up screaming. Sometimes you wake with someone screaming. But digging helps somehow. The movement gives you something to do, something physical and repetitive. Scrape the mud, transport it, squeeze it, and for a few moments your mind calms. It is not peace. It is just less noise. And that matters. Some days you dig new trenches for latrines. Other days communication tunnels, or rebuild walkways with splintered wood and prayers. Everything seems temporary, like decorating a sinking ship. But it gives your body a purpose while your brain desperately tries to stay inside your skull. You look down along the row. Jenkins is talking to himself again, whispering entire conversations in a low voice. Mason has not blinked in 5 minutes. You wonder if they are worse than you, or simply further along the same path. Later, during rations, you hear that someone lost his mind last night. He went barefoot into no man's land, muttering about angels. He did not return. You chew your canned meat and stare at the shovel. You do not cry. You don't have time for that. Instead, you go back to digging, not because you want to, but because if you stop, the war catches you. And when the war catches you motionless, it does not ask questions. You smell it before seeing it. A sickly sweet and nauseating smell, like chlorine mixed with copper coins and burnt leaves. Someone shouts, "Gas! Gas!" and the whole trench turns to chaos. The men stir like overturned ants, seeking their gas masks with trembling fingers. You struggle with the straps, your hands slippery from mud and panic. The mask is rubber, stiff from cold, and uncomfortable against your face. The lenses fog instantly, and the mouthpiece feels like sucking air through a damp rag. You hope that it works. You hope they kept it safe. You hope it's not the cheap one they gave rookies last week. Hope is all you have left. The gas is greenish-yellow and spreads across the battlefield as if it were alive, as if it were hunting. It seeps into every gap and crater, silent and implacable. It's probably chlorine gas, or maybe phosgene, a silent killer. If you're very unlucky, mustard gas. That doesn't kill you right away. It just makes you wish it would. Historians still argue about which gas most undermined morale. None was especially effective at killing many people quickly, but it wasn't necessary. Terror sufficed. The mere idea of drowning in your own lungs, of seeing your comrades scratch their throats while coughing up blood, that was what mattered. The guy next to you didn't get his mask on in time. Now he is coughing, but it's not a normal cough. It is a roar that sounds like something tried to escape his chest. His eyes are red, and blisters appear on his skin. You want to help him, but there's nothing you can do. You have seen how this ends. It's like drowning on land. The gas does not discriminate here. It seeps into shelters. It sticks to ground. Sometimes it adheres to uniforms, and you can take it inside with you, poisoning your clothes. Masks help, but they aren't magic. They fail sometimes. The straps break often. The filters clog up. Sometimes you are too slow. And even when gas disappears, it remains in mind. You never breathe easily again. Every cold morning, fog makes your heart race. Every strange smell puts you on edge now. You don't just fear gas. You anticipate it always. You wait for it now, like a reaper preferring slow, invisible deaths. There are drills, of course, practice alerts, officers shouting through megaphones. But when reality comes, it is always faster, crueler, more confusing now. You have one chance, maybe two if the wind is with you. Normally, it is not. Gas was supposed to be the future of war, science's contribution to progress. Technically, treaties prohibited it, but everyone used it anyway because, once the line is crossed, it disappears like visibility in a gas attack. The bombing resumes 10 minutes later, as if the war had decided that you have had enough horror for now and returned to the usual programming. You tear off your mask and vomit in the mud. Your lungs burn. Your eyes cry. Your mouth tastes of copper and fear. A few meters away, someone is crying. He doesn't scream. He just cries silently. The mask still hangs from his ear. He looks like he's 17, maybe younger. You turn around. You both live another day. It is the best that one can expect. It starts with an itch, just a little on the back of neck, then on the chest, then on crotch. In one day, you have it everywhere. You scratch until your skin flakes like paint. Congratulations. You have joined the not-so-exclusive club of those infested by trench lice. They are not friendly bedbugs from your neighborhood. They are full-time parasites with a battlefield tenacity. They get into every seam of your uniform, lay eggs in your armpits, and treat your skin as a buffet. And the more you scratch, the worse it gets. You start to feel them crawling even when they aren't. Lice are part of the territory. You live in same clothes for weeks. You sleep in the mud. You share narrow shelters with dozens of men, each one a walking zoo of microscopic parasites. Hygiene, that is a concept from before war. Here, you're lucky if you get a bucket of warm water once each week. Some joke about it. Company pets, they say, and dedicate themselves to catching them one by one, crushing them between fingernails. Pop is the sound of small satisfaction. You try it too. It is useless. They always come back, like guilt or ration room. There are delousing stations, usually behind lines. You undress, hand over your uniform, and pray that the hot iron or steam does not disintegrate what little fabric is left. Historians still argue whether delousing was really effective or just a placebo to prevent soldiers from completely losing it. Most of the time, the lice returned in under 24 hours. And not only did they itch, but they also transmitted diseases. In particular, trench fever, a bacterial infection spread by lice feces. That is so. You can get seriously ill from tiny bugs that defecate in your pores. Fever, headaches, muscle pain. No cure, no rest. Another cheerful souvenir from the Great War gift shop. There is no dignity to it. You scratch yourself during roll call, during meals, during bombings. At some point, you stop caring who is looking at you. You could be on fire, and you would still scratch your waist like a Victorian ghost with unfinished business. You try boiling your socks. You try to wash yourself with the freezing rain. Some shave their whole body. Others smear their skin with butter in a desperate attempt to drown the little monsters. Nothing works for very long. In the end, you feel no shame. Your bunkmate scratches himself. The officer scratches himself. The chaplain scratches himself. It becomes the soundtrack to life in trenches. A whisper of dirty fingers on dirtier skin. But it does something to your brain. The constant itching, the helplessness. You start feeling that your body is no longer yours. That you are just a vehicle rented for dirt. The war invades every part of you, even those that you thought were too small or insignificant to matter. When life is especially hard, you cannot sleep. You lie in your corner of the trench, looking at the stars through a gap in the sandbags, and you wonder how humanity invented Mozart, the pyramids, and steam engines, but still hasn't figured out how to kill the bugs. The order arrives during tea time. You are crouched next to a rusty lunchbox, dipping your last lump of sugar in what can barely be called water. The corporal approaches, his face tense, and murmurs for words that churn your stomach more than spoiled canned meat. Tomorrow, we move to the front. You knew it would happen. You just hoped it wouldn't be your turn this time. Moving to the front means going out, leaving the trench in a no man's land and straight into enemy machine guns. It is more a ritual sacrifice than strategy, repeated endlessly because someone at headquarters still believes that with enough corpses they will end up advancing. The plan is always the same. The artillery weakens them. Then, when the whistle blows, you climb the ladder and run. That is all. No cover, no guarantees, just mud, wire, and bullets that move faster than thought. Historians still argue whether the World War I generals were visionaries trapped by obsolete tactics or simply criminally lacking imagination. In any case, you are the one who must run at full speed through an open field of death with 27 kilograms of equipment and blind hope. You spend the night looking at your boots, without sleeping, without even blinking much, just looking. Clean your rifle again, even though it was already clean. Fold the letter you sent home, in case it is the last one they find on your body. Count the minutes, then the hours, then the minutes again. Dawn breaks, a whistle is heard, and then movement. Chaotic, desperate, clumsy movement. You climb the ladder with trembling legs and lungs full of fog. No man's land is a cratered wasteland, full of broken helmets, barbed wire, and corpses. A fog clings to ground, thick with cordite and blood. You run. The machine guns start firing at once. Hot, 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 hot. You see men falling in all directions. The extremities bend as if made of straw. You keep advancing, not from bravery, but stopping is worse. You pass by a man shouting for his mother, and another who does not move, only looks upwards with very open and glassy eyes. You stumble on a root. No, it is a rib cage. You try not to think about it. You keep going forward. Your feet are bleeding inside the boots. You breathe with difficulty. Your legs tremble. You shoot your rifle without aiming, just to do something, just to remind yourself that you are still alive. When the whistle of retreat finally sounds, if it sounds, somehow you are still standing. You stagger back to the trench, diving headfirst like a swimmer returning to the surface. A few others manage it too, not many. There is no celebration, only silence, breathing, and the low moans of the wounded, if they are lucky enough to keep making noise. You don't ask about Jenkins or Ellis. You have seen what happened. You sit down, wipe the blood from your sleeve, and wait for the next whistle. Because there is always another whistle. You are on night watch, which is a polite way of saying that you have been chosen to stay completely immobile in the frozen mud while you slowly lose contact with reality. The stars shine, millions of them, but are not useful to warm you. The moon illuminates the trench like a stage, and you, dear actor, are the center of attention with death lurking backstage. Everyone else is asleep or pretending to be. You envy them, although most are probably dreaming of home or simply trembling in silence, waiting for dawn. You, however, have to remain alert because that is when they arrive. The enemy is not stupid. They know that you are tired. They know it is easier to slit throats in the silent darkness than to charge at noon. So you keep your eyes wide open and your finger near the trigger. Each whisper suggests a possible patrol. Each creak of twigs is disguised dim. The cold is an enemy itself. It finds the cracks in your coat, seeps into your joints, and bites your bones. Your breath fogs before your face. A small cloud of heat that you would wish to be able to get into. You have not felt your fingers for half an hour. You have not blinked correctly in 10 minutes. The only thing that keeps you standing is duty, and the fact that if you sit down, you may not get up again. Your imagination begins betraying you. Is that a figure beyond the barbed wire? Has something moved, or is your mind painting shadows and turning them into ghosts? You squint in the dim light, your heart beating strongly, and you feel that primal impulse to fight or flee. But you cannot flee. There is nowhere to go. So you fight against panic. Historians still discuss if the psychological wear of the night watch was more damaging than the combat itself. Some veterans swore that the wait, the anticipation, was worse than combat. You begin to understand their point. Then you hear it, a slight tinkle, metal against metal. Perhaps a shovel, perhaps a bayonet grazing the wire. Your blood freezes. You whisper to the man next to you. There is no answer. He is asleep or too scared to answer. You nudge him. There is still no answer. So you are alone. You crack your lips. You wait. You squint. Nothing happens. Minutes or hours pass. You lose track of time. Then, suddenly, the sun begins to rise. Pink spreads across the sky like an apology. The danger fades, hiding until nightfall. Another poor soul relieves you, with equally sunken, frozen eyes. He greets you with his head, like one ghost greets another. You don't speak. You just get off and curl up in your damp corner of the trench. Sleep quickly invades, but is not deep. And even when your body shuts down, your ears remain open, attentive to the next noise, the next crack, the next whisper in the dark, because here there is never true silence. Neither in your head nor in this place. It's Christmas, or at least that's what the calendar says. December 25th. You're no longer entirely sure, because time lost its meaning at some point between your second trench foot scare and the fifth failed offensive. Even so, something is different today. The air is strangely still. The weapons have fallen silent. And then you hear it. Faint, strange, impossible singing. It doesn't come from your trench, but from theirs. You stick your head over the parapet slowly, carefully. You are not greeted by bullets, only voices. German voices singing quite quietly. You recognize the melody. Silent night. Echoes in no man's land like something out of a dream. Fragile and otherworldly. One by one, heads rise on both sides. There are no shots, no screams, only singing. Someone from your unit starts humming. Another joins. Then someone raises their voice and begins to sing the English version. Within minutes, both trenches are humming the same melody, half in English, half in German, totally incredulous. Then someone stands up. He comes out of the trench, unarmed, with his hands up. You watch in horror as he walks towards no man's land. A moment later, someone on the other side does the same. They meet halfway. They shake hands. It spreads quickly. The men come out, laughing nervously like children who broke curfew. Soon you are there too. The boots sink into the mud. You approach the men you tried to kill the day before. One of them offers you a cigarette. You give him a can of jam. Someone else hands out chocolate. A soccer ball appears, and suddenly a game forms. British against Germans. The rifles are left aside as if they were firewood. Historians still argue about whether the Christmas truce of 1914 was a spontaneous miracle or an accidental ceasefire turned into legend. But none of that matters now. All that matters is that, for a few hours, the war stopped. You discover that your enemies have names. They show you photos of their wives and children. You don't understand all the words, but you understand enough. You laugh. You try to speak in your broken German. They try to speak in their rudimentary English. Someone teaches a soldier to play the harmonica badly. Everyone applauds, anyway. But as the sun begins to set, so does the spell. The officers appear. Orders are shouted. People begin to retreat awkwardly, reluctantly. A man shakes your hand again and says, "Good luck." You would like to say something more, something meaningful. But now the words weigh on you. You return to your trench. The soccer ball is left abandoned in the mud, a small reminder of humanity buried under all this chaos. The weapons sound again the next day, at first almost as if asking forgiveness, then confidently. The war resumes where it left off, as if the truce was just a pause button held down too long by the generals. And now killing seems even colder, because now you have looked into the eyes of the people you are supposed to destroy. You kill anyway because that is your job. But a part of you will always remember that impossible day when the world forgot how to hate. You hear the scream before you see the wound. It is a high-pitched, broken sound, more like the last cry of a wild animal than a scream. You turn your head, and there he is, slumped over a shell crater, clinging to what used to be a leg. He is not dead yet, but give the trench a minute. You run towards him. You press with your hands where the blood gushes. You feel the sticky heat seeping between your fingers. He is shaking, eyes wide open, saying something over and over. You can't understand it. It could be a name, a prayer, or just nonsense. Someone calls for the stretcher bearers. You keep pressing. Someone offers rum instead. You take it, especially for yourself. The medicine here is a gamble. Maybe they will give you morphine. Maybe they will give you brandy. Maybe they give you a wound. The doctors arrive and work quickly. They're good at working fast. They have to be. They sell the stump, they place it on a stretcher, and they run. Yes, they run through the mud and the smoke to the nearest aid station. You follow them. Or perhaps they order you to. Everything is confused. The field hospital is a tent or hut, depending on location. Inside, it smells worse than in the trench. Blood, disinfectant, fear, and something burning. A surgeon, sleeves rolled up and eyes dead from exhaustion, examines him. He nods. Amputation. Nobody cries. Nobody asks. It is routine. You don't look. Instead, you keep looking at the wall. There's a hole through which you see sky. You fix your gaze on a cloud and try to pretend you don't hear bones break. Historians still argue whether medical care in the First World War was a marvel of improvisation or grotesque chance. Probably both. Antiseptics were scarce. Tetanus vaccines were a recent invention. Anesthesia worked sometimes, but in most cases survival depended on the wound not reaching vital organs and on someone arriving in time before bleeding to death in mud. If you came out of the trench alive and wounded, you were not out of danger. Infection was the true cause of death. The masked green gas blackened and swelled your skin. Sometimes the whole body gave up, and the doctors could not do much with their reused tools and hands trembling from exhaustion. You're sitting by your friend's bed. He is sleeping or unconscious. It is hard to know. You stare at the bandage covering what was his leg. You wonder if he will thank or hate you later. In another place, someone is groaning. Another man is missing a hand. Someone else coughs blood into a tin. You are surrounded by people barely alive and people who have not completely died yet. The smell of rot fills the corners. A nurse walks by. You nod. She returns it. Neither speaks. You return to the trench later that night. Your hands still smell of soap and blood. You look at your own limbs, still intact. You try to sleep, but your uniform feels strange, your skin too clean. You close your eyes and see the wound again. You hear that scream again. You curl up and hope tomorrow brings fewer miracles. There's a part of the trench you don't discuss. A soft spot near the far end, past the boards, and near the rotten support wall. It looks like just another puddle until you step on it, and it swallows you. The first time it happens, it's Jenkins. He is walking towards the latrine when his boot sinks slightly. He laughs, pulls up, and his leg disappears to the knee. Another step, and he sinks to his chest. When you reach him, there is panic in his eyes. He is scratching at the mud, trying to get up, but it is like quicksand mixed with death. You approach. Others do too, but it is too late. The trench takes him. You tell yourselves it was a coincidence. A collapsed and rain-filled shell crater. A weakened section of the earth. But deep down, you know the truth. This place eats people. The mud is not just earth. It is flesh, rot, blood, and chemical waste. There are layers of men who died there and were never taken out. The water table is high. The drainage is bad. And the war keeps throwing more corpses. Historians still debate how many soldiers died not from bullets or gas, but from mud. Some are never officially counted, only filed as missing. There are entire sections of the Western Front that became liquid tombs. You avoid them. You walk carefully. You test the earth as if it were a wild animal. And the thing is that the mud catches everything. It eats rifles, shovels, even horses. Once you saw a supply mule disappear into it, kicking. Nobody talks about that either. The mud is always wet, always cold, always there. It fills your boots, rots your feet, and slowly erodes your will to stand. You slip, you fall, and suddenly you are upside down, with your mouth full of mud that tastes like oil and ancient death. You spit, but the taste remains. You may carry it with you for the rest of your life. At night, the trench moves. You would swear it breathes. A wall collapses. A grate breaks. You hear someone scream, then silence. Sometimes you dig them up. Sometimes you don't. You stop asking their names. A guy, a poet, called it the greedy ground. He said the earth there had turned carnivorous. Another said that it was the manifested war, devouring what bullets had not been able to finish. In any case, you watch where you step. You learn to listen for the revealing sound of the mud as it sinks. And if the boot grabs you, leave it behind. Better to limp than die. One morning, you find a hand that protrudes from the wall. Only the fingers, as if they still hoped no one would remove them. You simply surround it as if it were another part of the trench, because it is. The war ends. Technically, someone says that it's over. The news filters from the officers like everything else. Late, confused, slightly unbelievable. There is no victory parade, no thunderous cheers, just a long, strange silence broken by a phrase whispered in the morning frost. We can stop now. You don't know what to do. You sit in the trench with the helmet still on and the rifle in your lap. The mud has not gone anywhere. Neither have the rats. The sky looks the same. There is no row of angels descending to take you to a warm meal and a soft bed. Only Jenkins, or what's left of him, buried under a board where you carved his initials. Historians still argue whether the armistice of November 11th, 1918, was a triumph of diplomacy or just a pause before the next disaster. What they agree on is this. The men at the front did not feel like victors. They felt like survivors, and not even complete. They tell you that in the end you can go home. The trains are chaos. The hospitals are full. The paperwork is endless. You wait as you always have. The war may be over, but the waiting is not. When you leave, you carry your duffel bag and your scars, some visible, most are not. The train smells of stale coal and anxiety. You sit between two men who do not speak. One is missing a hand. The other looks out the window as if he had forgotten his glasses. Back home, the streets are cleaner. The air feels softer. People greet you. Strangers smile at you. They tell you things like, "Thank you for your service." And you nod because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside, you feel like a ghost haunting your own life. The trench remains with you in your boots, in your bones, in your lungs. You smell gas when there is none. You hear artillery fire in the passing trucks. You wake up on your clean mattress, sweating, with your heart racing, convinced that you have returned to the mud. Some nights you take out the letter that your sister sent you, the one that helped you get through Christmas. You read it until the ink becomes a comforting blur. People ask you how it was. You tell them it was the war and leave it there, because how to explain the sensation of mud when it drowns your ankles, or what it feels like to dig graves in which perhaps you will sleep tomorrow? They give you a medal. Perhaps it is small, bright, and utterly ridiculous. You keep it in a drawer. There is not a moment when you say, "Now I am cured." There are no credits. There is not an inspiring violin solo. Only time, long time, slow and turbid. The newspapers call you a hero, but you do not feel like one. You feel like someone who has seen too much and returned with some pieces missing. And in some way, that is still better than most. You return to a world that has moved on without you. They say that the war has ended. And yet, wherever you look, it still endures. Engraved on stone monuments, whispered in corners of bars, covering tables like a shadow that nobody wants to name. They give you a uniform without mud, a certificate, a pat on the back, as if that were enough to undo the knots in your chest. You try to find work. The foreman at the factory says that they have already filled the position. The farmer says that you are too rigid. The bank tells you that your hands shake too much. And it is true that they shake. They have never stopped doing it. Not entirely. You spill the tea. Your tools fall. You cannot queue without looking for a place to hide. You walk down a quiet street and are startled when a car backfires. Someone tells you, everything is in your head. You nod your head. Of course it is. That is the problem. You see your friends. What is left of them? Those who made it. Some walk with canes. Others look at the ground when they speak. Some smile too much, as if trying to compensate for the rest. Most of the time they sit together in silence, but it is the only silence that does not weigh so much. Once you try to explain it to someone, to a girl that you liked before you left. She asked you, "Was it scary?" You open your mouth. The words do not come out. She smiles awkwardly. "Well, I am glad that you have returned." You nod your head. She does not call again. The historians continue discussing how long it took the veterans of the First World War to reintegrate. Some say that they never did. Others say that they were expected to. Others say that society silently left them behind while they remained trapped in no man's land. Continue with your routine. You prune hedges. You mend boots. You read newspaper and ignore the growing tension in Europe. Once again, medals go into a drawer. The uniform is kept inside a box. You try to sleep at night, but dreams do not care about armistices. You return to the trench again and again, rifle in hand without bullets, looking for Jenkins in a wall of fog. And, nevertheless, somehow you keep going, putting one foot in front of the other. You take care of garden. You feed cat. You write a letter to the mother of a friend, although you already sent the official one years ago. In this one you only say, "It was fun. He didn't deserve it. None of us deserved it." Because in the end, the war didn't end when the weapons fell silent. It came home in your skin, in your lungs, behind your eyes. It is not only in history books. It is in you, and always will be. So now, while the lights go out in your room and the hum of the fan fills silence, let yourself be carried away from the mud and the thunder. You have come a long way tonight through the fog and the fire, through silence and the screams, through places where no one should live, much less remember. But here you are, still breathing, still holding on. Let the echo of the trench walls now fade behind you. Let the smell of gunpowder and damp will dissolve into nothing. The war is far away and your feet are no longer trapped in mud. There are no whistles, no boots stomping, no voices shouting from the firing squad. Only your breathing, firm and soft, rising and falling like the surface of calm sea. Now you're safe. You can close your eyes safely. You can leave the trench behind. The war may whisper sometimes, when the wind blows in the right direction or when the darkness gets too long, but here it cannot reach you. Not tonight. So sleep, soldier. Sleep deeply. You have arrived home. Hello. Guys, tonight we travel to an era of fjords, freezing and facial hair so unkempt that it could house livestock. Welcome to the Viking Age, a world of creaking longhouses, smoky air, and constant suffering. Tonight, you are not the fearsome raider of Hollywood legends. No, you are just another unfortunate soul born into a life of damp wool, superstition, and disappointment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to create a soft hum, and let's start tonight's journey together. You will need comfort because your Viking life has only just begun. The day does not begin with the crowing of a rooster, but with your stomach reminding you that it has been almost 12 hours since your last meal, assuming you managed to swallow it. Viking cuisine isn't exactly worthy of a Michelin star. You get out of a straw bed that smells like old sheep and stand up in a one-room longhouse full of snoring relatives, steaming cattle, and smoke so thick you can chew it. Breakfast is waiting. And by breakfast, we mean sour milk that is more lumpy than liquid and rye bread from the day before, which in a pinch could serve as a weapon. You bite something that crunches, but it shouldn't. Is it a small stone? A beetle? A tooth? It doesn't matter. You keep chewing. Food is food, and your options are limited. If it is summer, maybe there is fresh goat cheese. If it is winter, you pray that. The moldy barrel of dried herrings does not kill you before the cold. Historians still debate how often Vikings ate meat, despite the popular belief that they lived on steaks and beer. The truth is that meat was a luxury, not a lifestyle. Most meals are porridge, broth, or fermented horrors. Bark bread. Yes, literal tree bark mixed with grain is not famine food. It is a seasonal favorite when grain runs out. You chew as if your life depended on it, because it does. There is also beer on the table, but don't get excited. It is weak, cloudy, and served warm in a wooden bucket. But it is safer than water, which often shares a source with your neighbor's latrine. Hydration is a lottery, so you sip warm barley water and try not to think about what floats in it. Then there are the unwanted guests. Parasites are part of the Viking food chain, specifically the part that lives in your intestines. Tapeworms, roundworms, liver flukes, you name it. They have colonized your intestines like small Norse conquerors. You are not alone, and you are never clean. An archaeological study even found human coprolites. By the way, this is fossilized feces containing parasite eggs from fish, pigs, and humans, all in the same poop. It's a buffet inside you, whether you eat or not. Fun fact, Vikings used burnt animal bones as a condiment. That's right. You sprinkled ash on your porridge because salt was scarce, expensive, and treasured like gold. If you wanted flavor, you better enjoy the essence of the previous day's fire. And breakfast was communal, by the way. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with relatives who have not bathed in weeks, with your elbows submerged in a wooden pot, each trying to eat around the rats that dive in from time to time to taste. Nobody talks much. Words are rationed like grain. And besides, your mouth is busy controlling damage from something that tastes suspiciously like boiled sock. But you eat it. Everything. Because you need strength to face a day of work in the field, cutting, transporting, fixing roofs, or possibly preparing for a raid. Hunger is a faithful companion, and you have learned to ignore its claws. You finish the meal with a hiccup of regret and a silent prayer to Thor so he does not give you trouble. You may die in a swamp today, but at least you won't starve. Probably. You might think that living in a frozen swamp full of furious gods and undercooked fish would entitle you to some luxury, like a bath or a shirt that doesn't itch like betrayal. But no, hygiene in Viking society is more a folkloric concept than an everyday reality. You start your morning routine scratching everywhere. The infested scalp, the armpits in full fungal civil war, the underlayers. Let's not talk about that. Lice are not only commonplace, they are roommates. You even have a special comb for them carved from bone. And yes, everyone has one. In fact, archaeologists have found more Viking lice combs than actual weapons, which says much. The Vikings bathed more often than their European neighbors, once a week if the water wasn't frozen. They called Saturday wash day or lardiger. But don't imagine spa bathrobes and perfumed oils. It's more like sitting in lukewarm swamp water while your cousin throws buckets of cold water on your back and makes fun of your body hair. You wash with ash soap, which is like rubbing sandpaper and disappointment onto your skin. It doesn't help that your only towel is probably shared with 3 other people and smells like someone dried smoked fish on it. Now, for the bathroom, there is no room, of course, just a hole in the ground surrounded by planks. Maybe behind the long house, if you're lucky. If you don't have that, there's just forest. Toilet paper. How adorable. Try moss or snow. You choose the least painful option and hope no curious goat stares you in the eye. Here comes a fun part. Scholars still debate whether the Vikings used chamber pots indoors during the harsh winters or simply held on until their bladder negotiated with the ice. In any case, indoor plumbing is a dream for another millennium. Let's talk about clothes. You put on a tunic of rough, unprocessed wool, something between a horse blanket and an existential crisis. Underwear is not common, so you learn to keep warm with creative diapers. Your leggings are hand-knitted, possibly uneven, and tied with laces that dig into your skin as soon as you bend over. There's a layer of skin to keep you warm, but it smells like the animal it comes from and constantly sheds, leaving remnants everywhere. In your shoes, 2 pieces of sewn leather, soaked and frozen in the morning. If your toes don't go numb by noon, it's a miracle. Historians still argue whether the Vikings stuffed their shoes with straw to keep warm or simply ignored the freezing as an experience that forged character. There are no mirrors in your house, just puddles and polished metal. So getting ready is a matter of guesswork. Maybe you pluck your eyebrows or trim your beard if you have a free second, but mostly you hope to look less horrible than your brother, whose nose is permanently red from the cold and from me. And yet, people say you smell less than other medieval cultures. Somehow, despite all this, you have a reputation of being cleaner than the average European. But that's like saying your hovel is less on fire than your neighbor's. So you scratch, splash, and move on, leaving behind a trail of dead skin and regrets. And that, my friends, is the ultimate in Viking hygiene. Dressing like a Viking is not so much a matter of fashion as of survival. And barely even that. You start the day wrapped in so much wool that you would make a sheep nervous, but somehow you are still cold. The wind goes through your tunic like gossip in a medieval room. Anyway, you keep warm, although each additional garment is like adding another sandpaper hug to your misery. Your main garment is a tunic woven by someone who did not quite master symmetry. One sleeve is narrower than the other, and the collar has been patched so many times that it now lies diagonally across the chest, like a poorly drawn scarf. If you're lucky, it's dyed brown, that is, it's dirty, and we've given up trying to fix it. The outer layer is attached to the shoulder with a brooch that you inherited from an uncle who probably died face down in a urine swamp. Technically, it is a status symbol, although the brooch does not fasten well, and the cape flutters violently in the wind like a broken sail. Some brooches are beautifully engraved. Others are simply pieces of bent metal that someone swore looked like a wolf. Historians still debate whether underwool was common or an uncommon luxury. What is not discussed is the constant chafing. You walk like you've been riding a wooden horse uphill for 3 days. And all because your pants are sewn with goat wool that still has an emotional charge. And the shoes? The average Viking boot is made of 2 pieces of leather sewn with dried gut and sheer optimism. No soles, no grip, nor arch support. If you step in the mud, which you will, your foot becomes a portable swamp. Freezing is not so much a risk as a yearly tradition. The belt holds everything. Knife, bag, lighter, and if you go out for long, some dried fish. There are no pockets, which means you're constantly patting yourself like a forgetful thief. And if you are rich, you may have metal rings sewn to your clothes, not for decoration, but to prove that you didn't die in a ditch last winter. Viking women don't have it any easier. In fact, their outfits are even more complex. Multi-layered dresses with aprons fastened with oval brooches that serve as improvised tools. Everything is tied, knotted, or fastened with bone needles, which means that getting dressed is basically arming yourself. Oh, and fashion. Forget it. You're not going to start a trend. If your clothes are too pretty, people will think you're trying too hard. If it is too tattered, they will think that you already died once. The best you can hope for is that it's vaguely functional. A curious detail: the Vikings sometimes dyed their clothes with crushed insects or fermented urine to get the right shade. So yes, you're wearing what is basically a sweater made of bugs and pee. It smells as good as it sounds. But you go out anyway, with your head held high, your tunic billowing, your boots splashing, looking like someone who has just lost a fight with a bale of hay. Because in the Viking world, survival isn't about looking good. It's about pretending you don't notice how much everything itches. By mid-morning, you're ready to commit violent acts. Not figuratively. You may have to kill someone today, and not even for a good reason. Because in Viking life, peace is just the awkward silence between 2 axe blows. You carry a weapon not because you are a soldier, but because everyone else does. Even the 12-year-old son of the blacksmith has a knife, and the goat herder has a club that has seen more action than the local chief. If you are a free man, you are expected to be armed at all times. If you're not armed, people assume that you're dead, that you're useless, or that you're plotting something, and not necessarily in that order. Your weapon is probably a hand axe. Not that elegant double-edged weapon that you see on television, but a work axe that can split firewood or skulls, depending on the mood. It is patched, rusty, and has a name like Old Biter or Stick. If you are very rich or incredibly lucky, you may have a sword, but most people only see one in their entire life, and usually from the wrong side. Historians still argue about whether Viking violence was constant or seasonal. Some say raids were infrequent and selective. Others claim that bloody disputes were as common as birthdays. One thing is certain: discussions escalate quickly. A dispute over some sheep can turn into a multi-generational bloodbath with legal proceedings exile, and the mysterious burning of someone's house overnight. You head to the countryside with your axe, not only to cut firewood, but because your neighbor once accused your uncle of stealing his fishing net. That grudge still lingers. Everyone smiles, but no one forgets. That is the Viking version of community. There is no police, no sheriff, number 9/11. Justice is served cold, with iron or, sometimes, fire. The closest thing to the application of the law is the local authority, a public assembly in which drunken farmers shout their disputes, while someone holds a goose for reasons no one explains, and that makes raids. If your boss says it's time to sail and terrorize the English coast, you must go. You cannot refuse. You are not recruited with an enlistment order, but by obligation, by the pressure of your peers, and by the hope of stealing enough silver to fix your roof before it collapses again. A curious detail: the Vikings sometimes carried their own cattle on the ships, tied in the corners to have fresh meat. Imagine that, crammed next to a bleeding sheep while sailing in a battle, wondering which of the two will be the first to be devoured. But even daily violence is exhausting. Fights break out over land, water rights, or because someone looked too friendly at your wife during the harvest festival. You cannot relax. You can't let your guard down because, as soon as you do, you become someone's anecdote about forgetting their axe that day. So you always carry it, not because you want to fight, but because, if you don't, you've already lost. If you think family life offers respite from the daily routine of public freezing and petty violence, I'm sorry. Being a Viking at home is like working on a sinking ship, but with more chores and louder livestock. Your longhouse is not a sanctuary. It's a crowded, smoke-filled barn disguised as home. You share it with your parents, siblings, grandparents, and, depending on your status, your new spouse and a disapproving mother. Oh, and at least a few goats. There is one room, a hearth, and zero intimacy. You are never alone, except in your head. And even that's a shared space during winter. From childhood, you're expected to work. There are no charming coming-of-age stories. There are no sabbatical years. At 5 years old, you transport firewood. At 8, you clean the animal pens. At 12, you are fully trained in grinding grain, repairing tools, and feeling existential fear. School. How adorable. Your education consists of what you hear between arguments and animal grunts. Historians still argue about whether Viking children had time to play, or if that concept is just a modern projection. But let's face it, if there was free time, they probably spent it trying to stay warm or watching older brothers get beaten for not doing it fast enough. The family structure is brutally practical. Marriages are arranged to strengthen alliances, not because you feel butterflies in your tunic. Love can arise over time, like moss on boots. But the most common thing is that it is a tolerated coexistence with some teamwork during the births of the goats. You don't choose your spouse, you negotiate it. The dowry and bride price are haggled over as if it were livestock. She is strong, fertile, and only slightly cursed. Sold. And once married, you better like your in-laws. They aren't leaving. The extended family is normal. You wake up with your father-in-law snoring half a meter away, your young son stepping on your face, and someone else's son screaming because a chicken pecked his finger again. They work together, eat together, fight together, and when the mead takes its toll, they cry together, but silently. Emotional outbursts are reserved for funerals and berserker frenzies. Everything else, you keep in the depths of your rune-engraved soul. Fun fact: Vikings sometimes resolve family disputes through poetry contests. That's right. Your father could have challenged your uncle to a wild versification instead of a duel. Friendly insults, small and large. But, in general, life at home is tiring. Your days are full of plowing, milking, repairing everything that breaks, which is everything, and teaching your own children to survive in a world that tries to kill them with the weather, wolves, and a very questionable cheese. There is no time for you. The roof has to be fixed. Remove the stew before it burns. Replace the straw so it doesn't rain inside again. The closest thing to leisure is sitting near the fire while everyone screams because the goat has escaped again. So when people say that home is where the heart is, remember that in Viking life, it is also where the smoke is, the goats, and where your nerves wear out. The gods are always watching or judging, or both. In Viking society, you cannot have personal beliefs. They are inherited along with grandma's wool coat and father's debts. Spiritual life is not so much inner peace as how many animals we can sacrifice before the fjord floods again. The day is woven with small rituals and great anxieties. You wake up, thank Thor if your cabin hasn't collapsed, and try to interpret if the strange raven flying in circles over your head means you are doomed, blessed, or simply that nature mocks you. Spoiler, it's probably the third option. Viking religion is not a pleasant mythology. It is a terrifying chaos of capricious gods, cryptic prophecies, and the disturbing certainty that fate already hates you. Odin, the father of all, sacrificed an eye in exchange for wisdom, which sounds noble until you realize that he also sends ravens to spy on you and can curse your entire lineage for insulting his poetry. Historians still argue whether the Nordic gods were worshipped out of fear or respect. Honestly, probably for both. You pray to Thor because he protects the farmers. You sacrifice to Freya to obtain a good harvest, but you never relax in her presence. You don't speak lightly about Loki unless you are prepared for a goat to spontaneously explode near you. And the sacrifices, oh my God. A good ritual may include a chicken or a goat if times are generous. A great ritual may include a horse. You cut its neck, collect the blood, and sprinkle it on the walls, the statues, and on yourself. The smell is unforgettable. It permeates. It haunts you. But you do it because if the gods are unhappy, they don't send plagues. They simply let your crops rot and your son break an ankle in the snow. The runes are not helpful either. Sure, you can carve them into bone or wood and ask them questions, but their answers are desperately vague. Beware the path of many feet. What does that mean? Geese, raiders, a really bad parade. Viking dreams are not private either. If you wake up screaming about a giant wolf or a river of teeth, the whole family gathers to decide if it means death, pregnancy, or a leaky roof. Dreams are treated like divine emails. Badly formatted, but always urgent. And if something really goes wrong, like your house burns down or your goats disappear overnight, people don't ask what happened. They ask who has cursed you. A jealous neighbor? A wandering seer? That one-eyed old man who muttered something strange and went into the forest walking backwards. A peculiar detail. Viking sorcerers, cedar workers, sometimes wear clothes of the opposite sex and use staffs to weave fate. That's how it is. But don't get too excited. You're not here for tourism. The boat crashes on a miserable beach, and in minutes, the chaos begins. Your job now? To kill strangers, steal their valuables, and, if possible, not die in the mud while someone you don't know shouts at you in a language you don't understand. The story is painted as gold. Thunderous charges, swords that clash, blood that splashes. Artistically against the sky. In reality, Viking battles are short, brutal, and terrifying. You don't kill anyone heroically. Brandish your axe. Pray that it hits something that bleeds. And hope you don't stumble en route and that a teenager with a pointy stick doesn't stab you in the spleen. And you're not even in the first line of warriors. Unless you're the favorite of some noble or you have been blessed by Baldur himself. You are the guy behind the guy with the sword. The bait, the distraction, the one who receives a shot in the leg while someone shouts about honor and throws a spear toward the enemy. Historians still discuss how organized the Viking raids were. Some affirm that they used compact shield formations and coordinated attacks. Others say that it was rather generalized shouting and hoping for the best. Judging by your current experience, it is the second, armor. You don't have any. Maybe a helmet, if you're lucky. Not of the elegant type with horns. That is a myth. Real Viking helmets are of plain iron, sometimes with a protection for the nose if you are rich, but in the majority of the cases you only have the scalp and a silent prayer. Your shield is round, of wood, and it is already chipped at the edges by yesterday's training. It won't save you from anything pointy, but it makes you feel like you were trying. The worst thing is the shouting, not only from the enemy, but from your own side. Battle shouts, shouts of fear, moans of death, all mixed in a soup of existential horror. You lose the notion of who is friend and who is enemy. Someone stabs a monk. Another slips in the mud, and you are there panting, bleeding, realizing that you are still alive only because nobody has aimed at you yet. Curiosities. Vikings sometimes carried poets with them so that they would compose verses about their bravery in battle. You could be knee-deep in a stranger's cabbage patch, dodging arrows, while someone in the background hummed a rhyme about your heroic stance, because nothing says epic conquest like a haiku shouted over a burning barn. And when everything ends, if you haven't died, you loot. Not treasures, but rather church cups, cattle, maybe some sacks of grain. You burn what you can't carry, spit on the altar, and return to the boat, dragging a sack that smells of old onions and guilt. But the cost is high. You have lost a friend, or maybe just someone to whom you once lent a rope. He is face down in the swamp with an arrow in his back and an expression of surprise. There is no funeral, nor honor, only a quick murmur to Odin and the silent decision to leave him where he fell. You have survived this time, but you limp, you cough, and in the deepest part of your being, you begin to wonder if maybe the raids are not as glamorous as they painted them to you when you were 12 years old and listened to the war stories of Uncle Bjorn. Even so, you get back on the vessel because the only thing worse than dying in a raid is returning home empty-handed. You return home not as a conquering hero, but as a disaster barely sown, full of bruises, calluses, and a slight emotional collapse. But there is no time for reflection. Winter is coming, and, unlike the poetic version, this one is real, long, and wants you dead at all costs. You have brought some silver, a half-broken glass, and a very frightened sheep. It's not bad, but it's not enough to buy warmth. Because in Viking Scandinavia, cold isn't just a season. It's a lifestyle. Your house is as wind-resistant as a wicker basket, and you already feel your fingers considering freezing as a permanent exit. Your joints hurt. Your nose is constantly dripping. Your skin cracks in places that you didn't know could crack. There is no moisture in the air. Unless you count the thin layer of mucus and sweat inside your clothes, you cannot rest. Winter is not a break. It's a slow-motion disaster. Your food reserves are almost always enough. You ration dried fish and porridge as if they were gold. You eat things you wouldn't give to a dog, and then you eat the dog. The parasites don't even die during winter. They just get slower and start biting more slowly. And then there is leprosy or dysentery or maybe just a cough that ends in death. Historians still argue about which diseases were more common in Viking settlements. But one thing is clear. Diseases were not rare. They were part of the family. You gave them a name. You tucked them in at night. Medical treatment is rudimentary at best. Do you have an infected wound from that English arrow? Do you burn it or put moss on it? Or maybe you ask the wise woman of the village to recite a spell while painting your chest with goose fat. Whether it works or not depends on your luck, your ancestors, and possibly your posture during the ritual. Fun fact. Some Vikings believed that diseases were caused by angry spirits or goblins that shot invisible arrows. The remedy? You guessed it, more chance. Sometimes with iron scissors hanging over the bed to confuse goblins. So now you're coughing up blood and sleeping under medieval wind chimes. There are also winter hands, a charming condition in which fingers swell, crack, and sometimes freeze. You wrap them in wool, kiss your amulets, and keep cutting firewood because no one else is going to do it. And if you lose a toe or two, keep walking. Literally, limping is now normal. To keep spirits up, people sing, carve runes, or tell stories by the fire, but they are not happy stories. They are stories about ice giants, sea monsters, and gods who betray you just because they're bored. Comforting things. And of course, someone always dies. A cousin, a baby, a goat, whatever. Death in winter is not dramatic. It's quiet. A gasp, a slump, a long silence. No one has time to cry as they should because the roof is leaking again, and you must remove the stew. So you keep going, you keep eating if there is food, you keep praying if the gods listen to you. And above all, you endure because winter does not kill quickly. It wears you down little by little, sneeze by sneeze, until you're not sure if spring is real or just a feverish dream that someone once carved on a bone. Let's take a moment to appreciate that no one had it easy in Viking life. But if you were a woman, it wasn't just hard. It was a nightmare carefully constructed with domestic responsibilities, social expectations, and occasional accusations of witchcraft, just to add excitement. You were born with a job. Not a career, but a job. From the moment you could walk, you were taught to weave, cook, raise children, and maintain a house that lost heat faster than a cracked wineskin. You had no options, only tasks. If you were lucky, you were praised for your embroidery. If you were very lucky, you'll not die giving birth before 20. Women in Viking society had more rights than their European counterparts. Sure, they could own land, divorce their husbands, and even wield a sword in exceptional cases. But those facts are often idealized. Historians still argue whether this independence was widespread or limited to a few lucky farm owners with good contacts and excellent posture. For most, freedom was theoretical. Marriage is not about romance. It's about alliances, properties, and how many cows you are worth. Love may come later or never. If your husband drinks too much mead and mistakes you for a sheep, you grit your teeth and move on. If he dies in a raid, congratulations. You are a widow, which may be the most independent you have ever been. Then there is childbirth. No hospitals, no anesthesia, just a couple more women, a carved rune for good luck, and the willpower not to scream loud enough to wake all the ghosts in the fjord. Mortality rates were high. For every child that is born, there's a chance that the mother will not survive. If you survive, in a week you go back to work because the goats are not going to milk themselves. And if you are smart, if you talk too much, know the herbs, or have dreams that accurately predict the weather, be careful. That's how you end up being the subject of rumors as vulvar, sir, or, even worse, a witch. Fun fact, some women were respected for this role, as they performed magical rituals and divinations. Others were convenient scapegoats. If the crops fail, if someone dies mysteriously, guess who they start looking at askance? The pressure to be perfect is relentless. Your house must be clean. Are your children alive? Your husband fed? Your loom never idle? You are expected to be a seamstress, healer, food preserver, and moral compass. And if you fail at any of those things, the gods might not hear your prayers, and your whole family could be cursed. So, no pressure. The best thing is that when you're finally old enough to relax, with gray hair, crunchy knees, a lifetime of sour milk, and repressed rage behind you, your family may decide to abandon you on the mountain. Historians still debate the extent of abandonment of the elderly, but the stories persist. If you can't contribute, some say you should return to nature. It is presented as a peaceful ending. Sure, if you consider dying frozen while the goats nibble at your cloak to be peaceful. So yes, Viking men had it hard. Diseases, raids, death by axe. But Viking women died doing laundry, during childbirth, or from sheer exhaustion. And they did it while being told they were the lucky ones. At this point, you're probably thinking, surely the legal system offered some protection, didn't it? Oh, sweet summer thrall. Viking law was not designed for protection. It was designed to entertain. The legal system seems less like judicial drama and more like a local talent show mixed with vendetta bingo. Justice is not given by rogue judges. It is given in the thing, a public assembly where free men gather to resolve disputes, settle accounts, and sometimes exchange goats. You stand in a muddy field while the whole community watches you try to argue that your neighbor's cow entered your property first. And you better be convincing, because if your story doesn't hold up, you can end up exiled or dead. The rules are a mosaic of local customs, oral traditions, and what the boss decided last Tuesday after 4 horns of beer. Historians still argue about how much of Viking law was applied consistently and how much was improvised. But one thing is clear, the legal loopholes were not errors. They were characteristics. If someone steals your axe, you could demand a ransom, literally a payment based on the object's value and your social status. But what if they say you stole it first? Now it's a shouting match with legal consequences. And if you insult someone in public, especially if you insinuate cowardice or question their ancestry, prepare to fight. Not in a court, but physically. The trials could include oaths, in which you and friends swore that you were innocent and hoped that no one blinked. Or there were trials by combat, in which the truth was determined by whoever broke the other's skull first. You could also be subjected to a test, such as carrying a red-hot iron bar to demonstrate your innocence. If the burns healed cleanly, the gods had spoken. If not, well, maybe you shouldn't have angered the elves. Legal curiosities. You could be declared an outlaw for things as insignificant as stepping on a noble's cape or throwing a fish at someone's wife during a banquet. Being an outlaw meant that anyone could kill you on the spot, and they were encouraged to do so. You became legally dead, like a walking expired coupon. You would lose your properties, your home. Your chances of surviving would be worse than usual, which is saying a lot. And if you are in charge of enforcing justice, good luck. Imagine trying to collect a fine from a man with 3 axes and 0 remorse. Sometimes, disputes turned into actual wars. Families burned each other's barns for decades until someone finally ran out of sons. And remember that all this chaos unfolds in public, amid shouts and alcohol. The place was also a market, a dating spot, and a stage for performances. While you argue for your life, someone nearby is selling cheese, and another is composing a verse about how badly you're doing in the trial. Sure, Viking law had its virtues. It encouraged negotiation, promoted local government, and, at times, avoided chaos. But for the most part, it was controlled chaos. Justice was not blind. It squinted at the sun, juggled knives, and hoped you wouldn't sneeze during your defense speech. So, if you're accused of stealing a sheep, insulting someone's beard, or looking like a sorcerer, prepare yourself. Gather your oaths, polish your shield, and maybe write a good poem to win sympathy, because in Viking justice, the truth matters far less than the spectacle. By now, you will have realized that Viking life is an endless parade of discomfort and humidity. And your house, the place that is supposed to offer you rest, is nothing more than a wooden coffin with domestic tasks. Your long house is not cozy. It is a rectangle of smoke-filled despair where you live, sleep, eat, and slowly go blind. There is no chimney. It's not an oversight. It is the design. The smoke from the central half rises in spirals and stays there. If it gets too dense, it can come out through the thatched roof or the small hole above the fire, but only after you've spent an hour marinating your lungs. Everything smells of soot. Your cape, your soup, your teeth. The eyes cry constantly. You cough until you invent new sounds. The children stumble with the reddened gaze of small witches. The historians still discuss whether exposure to smoke in the interior shortened life expectancy, but all agree that it probably made everyone irritable and asthmatic. The walls are insulated with what is at hand. Mud, moss, animal hair. Everything is vaguely warm and extremely flammable. The roof leaks at least 3 months a year, and the wind sneaks through the gaps in the boards like an uninvited ghost. You wake up with your beard covered in frost, and give thanks to the gods that it is not worse. As for places to sleep, there are no beds but piles. You and your family snuggle in sacks filled with straw covered with skins that smell of humid mammoth. There are no separate rooms. If someone snores, everyone enjoys it. If someone dies during the night, well, you take care of it after breakfast, which is cooked on the same fire in which you almost fall during the night. One misstep, and you burn your foot with the porridge. There is no kitchen, just a corner with somewhat fewer rats. Interestingly, some Viking houses had elevated platforms where people slept to be warmer. Sounds smart, right? Unfortunately, they also shared those platforms with dogs, cats, and, occasionally, chickens. Because heat is heat, even if it cackles. You try to clean the place with water that you have brought from a frozen stream and with a broom made of twigs. The dust and ashes only settle somewhere else. All surfaces are sticky, crumbly, or suspiciously viscous. In the corner there are bones from last week's stew, and no one remembers who had to throw them away. Oh, and let's not forget the plagues. Lice in the hair, fleas in the straw, mice in the food reserve, and sometimes even weasels. If something does not live in your house, it is probably broken or on fire. However, somehow this is still considered a well-kept home. People visit you and praise your hearthstones. They say, "Ah, how warm it is here," while their lungs give out halfway through the sentence. And despite everything, you endure. Because what else can you do? Move? With what money? With what energy? You fix the roof, stir the stew, and stoke the fire as if it were your only friend. Because it is. The irony of Viking life is that, despite all the effort dedicated to building a house, growing food, and carving runes, to protect themselves, you will probably die far from home, on some foreign and muddy coast, for a sack of half-rotten barley. Glory is the official reason. But the truth is that you were just trying to feed your family and, incidentally, steal a shiny chalice. The raid seemed heroic in the village, but once abroad, with your ankles sunk in an unknown mud, watching half of your companions limp from infected wounds, it seems less like an epic saga and more like a logistical error. You dream of hot porridge, dry socks, and not dying in a puddle. And if you fall, well, that's complicated. Funeral rites are important in Viking culture. If you die in the right place, and there is someone left to bury you, ideally, a burial in a boat surrounded by weapons and treasures, perhaps even a loyal horse to keep you company in the afterlife. But let's be realistic. Most dead Vikings are thrown into shallow graves with the rags they have left and maybe a spoon that someone does not want to take home. Historians still argue about how often boat burials actually occurred. They were probably reserved for the rich, the famous, or those with very persuasive families. You are more likely to end up forgotten under loose stones while your companions flee from a militia armed with torches. No poems, no songs, just silence and flies. A curious detail. Some invaders carried small bones from their home to be buried with them if they died abroad. The idea was that if they could not rest in their homeland, at least a part of them could. So now you're a battlefield victim and a travel-sized bone messenger. The worst thing is that you don't even know if dying in combat served any purpose. According to the Viking belief, to enter Valhalla, the afterlife of the warriors, you must die wielding a weapon in an honorable combat, preferably while a Valkyrie watches you. But who verifies it? Was your death noble enough? Were you carrying the sword in your hand or stuck under your body? Was the Valkyrie busy that day? At home, your family could try to honor you. Perhaps engrave your name on a runic stone, assuming they know how to write and are not too desolate. Most likely, they will focus on surviving the winter without you. Your youngest son could grow up remembering you as the one who left and never came back. Your name fades. Your legend never gets to form. And the loot for which you died is melted down to make a spoon that someone drops accidentally into the fire. And so you disappear, not in a blaze of glory, but in the cold, silent mud hundreds of kilometers from your reindeer skin pillow, and that bowl that you like so much. Because despite all the songs about heroes and dragons, most Vikings did not die in a legendary way. They simply died far from home, often alone, and usually too young to grow a decent beard. But maybe, just maybe, you die the right way. Sword in hand, with your guts spilling out theatrically, a battle cry echoing throughout the fjord. And for all that misery, you are finally promised your reward, the Valhalla. Except that once again, the small print ruins everything. They told you that Valhalla is a great hall in Asgard where fallen warriors feast with Odin, drink from magical goat udders, and wage glorious battles all day, only to be healed overnight and start again. Eternal combat and eternal beer. Sounds great if you like that kind of thing. But there is a catch. Several, in fact. First of all, not everyone can enter. You have to die in combat, okay, but not by tripping over your own axe or falling off the boat. It has to be noble, visible, stylish. Also, you have to be seen and chosen by a Valkyrie. That's right. Your entry into the afterlife depends on being seen by a celestial warrior riding a flying horse while you bleed to death under a horse. If she doesn't see you, bad luck. Historians still argue about how seriously the Vikings took Valhalla. Some think it was metaphorical, a spiritual reward for living bravely. Others say it was as real to them as death itself. In any case, the belief was strong enough to send terrified teenagers in a battle, hoping to impress divine judges who, frankly, looked overwhelmed by the volume of applicants. And if you don't pass the test, you can end up in hell, the cold and humid afterlife for the insignificant. It's not torture, it's just boring. Like waiting in an endless line at a freezing post office. No banquets, no songs, just a humid and eternal silence. Probably shared with the guy who stole your sheep 3 winters ago. There is also the ominous Ragnarok clause. Even if you enter Valhalla, you will not drink my milk forever. In the end, the gods' war, the world ends, and they call you to fight and die again. This time for good. So, even in the best case, the afterlife of the Vikings is a temporary job with bad severance. Curiosities. Some Viking funerals included funerary jewels. Volunteers were killed to accompany the tribal chief to the afterlife as his retinue. Congratulations. You may be someone's spiritual baggage. And yet, despite all its flaws, Valhalla keeps you standing. Through the smoke and freezing, the lice, raids, and broken teeth, you believe that there must be something more. That the suffering, fear, and endless wet will take you to a better place. It has taken heaven to take you somewhere better. But now, as your breathing slows and vision fades, you look up, not at a shining Valkyrie, but at a low rain cloud and a goat chewing your boot cord. There are no choirs, no golden halls, just mud and regret. Maybe the gods are testing you. Maybe your glory has only been delayed. Or maybe, just maybe, the afterlife is another story someone made up to keep you rowing one more mile. And so we gently move away from the frozen fields and stormy seas of your Viking life. The axe is now silent. The fire of the long house crackles weakly, projecting flickering shadows on soot-blackened beams. The wind outside whistles through the thatched roof, but inside is only stillness and the faint aroma of wood smoke and damp wool. Your muscles hurt no longer. The cold no longer bites. You lie wrapped in furs. The sounds of the world have softened into distant silence. The gods, with all their noise and thunder, have finally fallen silent. No more oars, shouts, or long marches in sleet and fog. Only the slow rhythm of your breathing, constant as the tide. Somewhere far away, a raven croaks. But it is not a warning, just goodbye. Maybe you did enough. Maybe the Saras will remember you, if only in a phrase muttered by a drunken old man unable to rhyme. Or maybe your story, like most, will simply fade into earth. Silent, invisible, and real. But for now, rest. Let the long darkness come. You have earned your silence. Hello, guys. Tonight, we will put on the somber leather boots of a figure that you're sure to have seen in memes. The Plague Doctor. You know who he is. Bird mask, black coat, spooky look. Most people think he was some kind of medieval superhero. He wasn't. Wearing that mask did not make you a healer. It made you a walking symbol of death, a bureaucrat with a stick, a human sponge for diseases. And yes, people hated you for it. So, before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is for you. I always love to see how the comments scroll from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, open the window a little if you dare, and let's begin tonight's journey to the most desperate job in history. It dawns in a medieval city. The morning light does not bring hope. It only reveals what the darkness mercifully hid. Carts piled with corpses, streets empty of life. The smell that floats in the air like a physical presence. This is your world now. The first rays of sun filter through the closed window as you begin the morning ritual that will transform you from human to monster. You reach for the leather mask that is next to your bed. Its long curved beak has pointed accusingly at the ceiling all night while you couldn't sleep. Your fingers run over the holes of the glass eyes, polished to a shine by countless hours of use. They say the eyes are the mirror of the soul. These glass circles will be the only thing they will see of you for the next 12 hours. You fill the beak with dried lavender, crushed mint, and rose petals. The sweet and penetrating smell floods your nostrils as you squeeze it tightly. Aromatic protection against the miasma. The poisoned air that was believed to carry disease. You add clove, cinnamon, and amber. More fragrance, more protection, more lies you tell yourself. Medieval medicine believed that the plague spread through stale air. The beaked mask was not magic. It was desperate science in desperate times, filling the beak with pleasant smells to filter out the deadly ones, as if flowers could stop death. The leather feels cool on your face as you put on the mask. The beak extends 30 centimeters in front of you, making you look like a nightmare bird. You tighten the straps behind your head, adjusting them until the eye holes are aligned. Your breathing sounds hollow inside the mask. Each inhalation brings the sweet-smelling herbs closer to your nose. Each exhalation is warm against your chin. Next comes the wide-brimmed hat, black as a starless night. You place it carefully on your head, completing your transformation. The heavy wax coat follows your shield against contamination. You button the buttons from your neck to your knees. Each closure is another barrier between you and the plague. The gloves are the last thing. The stiff leather makes your fingers clumsy. The tools of your useless trade will be more difficult to handle today, but that matters little. You see yourself reflected in a polished metal plate hanging on the wall. What looks back is not human. It is a nightmare creature, a bird-headed monster wrapped in black. The children will scream when they see you arrive. The adults will cross themselves and hurry past. The sick will look at you with a desperate hope that you cannot fulfill. You don't look like a healer. You look like death itself dressed for a ceremony. And that is precisely what you are. Not a doctor, an omen, not a savior, a recorder of the dying. Your presence in a home does not mean that help has arrived. It means that the end is close enough to document it. You grab your doctor's cane, a long wooden stick used to examine patients without touching them, to point out ailments and keep the desperate at bay. Some colleagues use it to prick the dead, making sure they are not simply sleeping before marking another casualty. The herbs in your mask are starting to work. Your world smells of gardens and spices instead of foul disease. It is a small respite that will not last long. At noon, the stench of death will penetrate even this fragrant barrier. At night, you'll hardly notice it anymore. You approach the door with rigid, ceremonial movements in your protective suit. The suit was not designed for mobility or comfort. It was designed to create distance between you and the infected, and between you and your own humanity. You look like a monster and smell like dashed hope. But the suit has another function too. When the townspeople see you, they do not see a friend or neighbor. They see the personification of plague. Their fear and hatred are not directed at you, but at what you represent. That is easier for them and you. With a last deep breath of herbal protection, you open the door and enter the disease city. Another day of death begins now. The weight of your suit oppresses your shoulders as you walk the empty streets. Each step of the heavy leather boots resonates against the stone, announcing your presence like a death bell. Citizens peer from closed windows and quickly disappear when they recognize your silhouette. Your first stop is the town hall, where a gloomy secretary awaits. He avoids looking at your face as he hands you a ledger and the list of houses to visit today. His hands tremble slightly as he passes you a pen and a small bottle of ink. Register the dead here. Note the sick now. That is your main duty now. The truth is that, behind this mask, you are not really a doctor. Not really at all. The streets are almost deserted now. As you continue on your way, your shadow, similar to that of a bird, lengthens before you. A dark prophecy spreads across the cobblestones now. Before the plague, you were a scribe, someone who knew how to read and write in a world where most did not. Your qualification for this position as plague doctor was simply that you knew how to write names and were not afraid of blood. Or at least that is what you told them then. The fear came later, after seeing what the disease could really do. Medieval cities were desperate to find someone willing to enter plague-ridden homes then. The real doctors, those trained at the universities of Padua or Melior, had fled to the countryside to attend to their wealthy clients or had succumbed to disease. Those who remained charged such high fees that only the richest could afford their services. Common people were doomed to suffer and die without care then. So the cities hired whoever they could find. Barbers accustomed to bloodletting, apothecaries with rudimentary knowledge of herbs, suspended medical students, and even clergymen who felt called to comfort the dying. Some plague doctors were as young as 14, barely old enough to understand the gravity of the task that awaited them. You knock on the first door with your cane now. Inside, a man lies sweating on a straw mattress, with his wife leaning beside him now. Dark swellings protrude from his armpits and neck. Buboes full of infection now. The room smells of disease and fear now. The wife looks at you with desperate hope, as if your bird-like appearance could herald some divine intervention. You put down your ledger and approach the sick man now. Your movements are safe and practiced. You have seen this hundreds of times before. Confidence is an act for the dying man, for his wife, for yourself. You have no idea what you are doing. Actually, no. The herbs in your mask cannot protect you. The leather of your gloves is too thin to truly protect you from contagion. You press the buboes with your cane, noting their size and color. You ask about the fever, the headaches when the symptoms began. These questions serve no more purpose than the ritual. You already know what afflicts him. You already know how this story ends. From a bag on your belt, you take a bottle of herbal tincture, the same lavender and mint that fills your mask, soaked in vinegar. It will not serve to cure the plague, but could alleviate the fever or at least provide the comfort of having done something. You instruct the wife to administer 3 drops every few hours. She nods, grabbing the bottle as if it were her salvation. Her eyes, above the mask, look at you with the reverence usually reserved for priests. The city's paid plague doctors a decent salary, much more than a scribe could earn normally. The high salary reflected not their skill, but their scarcity. Few were willing to take such a dangerous job. Some plague doctors were granted free accommodation, tax exemptions, even citizenship if they were foreigners. The advantages were substantial because the risk was immense. But no amount of money could buy real medical knowledge. The training period of a plague doctor could be as short as a single day, just enough time to learn how to put on the protective equipment and record deaths in the registry. Your medical training consisted mainly of theories about humors and miasmas transmitted by ancient texts that had never been questioned. You write in the registry: name, age, symptoms, prognosis. You write that last part in Latin, a language that common people cannot read. It protects them from the brutal truth. It protects you from having to say it aloud. You see yourself reflected in a tarnished mirror on the wall, the beaked mask, the wide-brimmed hat, the long cape, all creating an illusion of authority. But behind this disguise, you're just a bureaucrat with a cane pretending to treat the apocalypse. Your main qualification is knowing how to read and write, not medical knowledge. Your main objective is not to cure, but to count, to quantify the catastrophe so municipal officials can follow its evolution. As you leave the house, making the sign of the cross over the door with your cane, the herbs of your mask now mixed with the smell of disease, you wonder if the real doctors know more than you do. Their expensive education taught them to balance humors and align planets, not about invisible killers transported by fleas on rats. Their cures are as useless as your tinctures and prayers. The difference is that they know it. You, suspect, and the dying hope that neither is right. You return to the street, adjusting your mask, preparing to continue your somber procession through the dying city. The usual sweepers are dead, dying, or hiding. There is no one left to clean the daily accumulation of a city's existence. What was previously swept away now remains, rotting in the summer heat. You stop at an intersection, leaning on your cane to catch breath. The herbs in your mask have begun to lose their aroma, now dominated by the smell of the sick city. Under the lavender and mint, you can now smell it. The unmistakable smell of rot. Not only the rot of garbage and waste, but also that of meat. Human meat. Medieval cities were filthy even at the best of times. The narrow streets served as a dump for everything unwanted that was there. Leftovers, human waste, and animal corpses. The butchers killed the animals in the middle of the street, letting the blood spill into the same sewers where the children played. The tanners used urine and feces in their work, filling entire neighborhoods, with an ammonia stench so strong that it made the eyes water. But the plague transformed daily misery into something far worse. The systems that barely kept cities habitable had collapsed completely. The men who collected nocturnal excrement had disappeared entirely. Women who emptied chamber pots in designated areas now emptied them through windows, afraid to go outside. The pigs that once roamed the streets eating garbage would now rot beside their owners. You walk carefully around a pile in a road, covered with a dirty sheet. The shape guessed below is unmistakably human. Not everyone waits for death carts anymore. Some families push their dead into the street and retreat home, hoping someone will take care of remains. The smell intensifies as you approach the next house. Before you can knock, the door opens and a gaunt man lets you in without a word. Inside, the stench is truly unbearable. Your mask already protects you very little now. 3 people lie on pallets, all in different phases of the disease. An old woman has already died, but no one has closed her eyes or covered face. A young man writhes with fever. His buboes burst and ooze a dark liquid now. A girl, no more than 6, breathes with difficulty. The telltale swellings begin to form on her neck. There is no separation between sick and healthy in these tiny dwellings. There is no isolation, no quarantine at all. Everyone breathes the same air, touches the same surfaces, shares the same water bucket. The disease spreads through homes like fire through dry straw now. You move among them. Your leather coat brushes against sheets soaked with sweat and worse. Your gloves, stained by previous examinations, become more moist with each patient touched. The wax layer of your clothing softens in the sweltering heat of this crowded room. Medieval medicine lacked the concept of germs or contagion as we know it. There were no gloves to change between patients, no hand washing, no disinfectants used. The plague doctor's suit, with its theatrical protection, was not designed with hygiene in mind. It could not prevent the invisible transmission of disease. You take notes in the ledger, trying to keep pages clean despite your dirty gloves. The father asks if there is any hope for his son. You nod because you don't dare to tell the truth. The herbs in your mask have completely lost effectiveness, and each breath fills your lungs with the smell of death. When you leave, you take the house with you now. Its smell clings to your clothes, its fluids soak the leather, its despair weighs on you. You will carry pieces of this house to the next, and then to the next. Your rounds create a network connecting the sick and dying throughout the city. By noon, your feet are soaked inside your boots from the accumulated dirt of dozens of houses. Your coat has absorbed so much smell that it seems almost to have a life of its own. The mask meant to protect you from miasma now seems to trap death against your face. You don't cure people at all. You immerse yourself in their final smells. You're not a doctor who visits patients now. You're a collector of human misery, accumulating it on your clothes like a dreadful harvest. As you approach the next house, you realize that, under all the stenches, is a new one. Barely perceptible, yet getting stronger. You emanate it from yourself. The coppery Swedish smell of your own sweat makes you wonder if that's what fear smells like. Or maybe it's the first indication of disease making its way through your elaborate defenses. You put that thought aside and knock on the door with your cane. There's work to do, records to keep, false comfort to give. Dirt and stench are now just another part of your daily existence, as common as breathing. But with each house you enter, each body you examine, each family you fail to save, you can't help but feel like you're sinking further into the mire, and that soon it will cover you completely. The afternoon sun beats on your black coat as you approach a modest house on the outskirts of town. Your leather suit, designed to keep diseases at bay, now traps heat and sweat inside. Each movement produces a squeaking sound as moisture builds in each fold and wrinkle. But it's not the discomfort that overwhelms you today. It is knowing that nothing in your medical bag will save the people inside this house. You knock with your cane, and a tired-looking woman opens the door. She has eyes sunken from exhaustion and skin pale with fear. Without a word, she leads you to a back room where her husband lies in bed, his neck and armpits swollen with buboes the size of eggs. 2 small children are sitting in a corner, watching with wide eyes as you approach their father. You put the briefcase down and begin your usual routine. First, You examine the buboes with your cane, gently pressing the swollen lymph nodes. The man winces, and his eyes fill with tears. You have already seen these black swellings hundreds of times. They are death visible beneath the skin. Treatments against the medieval plague were based on medical theories that went back to ancient Greece and Rome. Doctors believed that health depended on the balance of four bodily fluids called humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Diseases were the result of an imbalance of these humors, which could be corrected by removing excess fluid. You search in your bag and take out a set of brass cups and a small torch. Cupping therapy, which consists of creating suction against the skin to extract harmful humors, was a common treatment for almost any ailment. You heat each cup and place it on the man's back, watching as the skin rises into the vacuum. The cups leave reddened circles when removed, but the buboes remain unchanged. Next, you take out a narrow blade and a bowl to collect blood. The wife turns away, unable to see what is about to happen. You select a vein in the man's arm as far from the buboes as possible and make a precise incision. Blood flows into the bowl, too dark and thick. Bloodletting aims to restore balance, to drain the disease. But you have performed this ritual countless times and have never seen it cure the plague. Some of your fellow plague doctors have more elaborate methods. They directly pierce the buboes, releasing a putrid mixture of blood, pus, and lymph. Others apply leeches to extract small amounts of blood over longer periods. The more cultured doctors prescribe complex herbal remedies containing dozens of ingredients: powdered emerald, unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, or even crushed Egyptian mummy. The rich pay fortunes for these exotic treatments. The poor settle for onions, garlic, and pigeon droppings applied directly to the swellings. Nothing works, neither for the rich, nor for the poor, nor for anyone. You bandage the man's arm and move to the next treatment. From your bag, you take out a small clay pot with an ointment made of goose fat mixed with herbs. You instruct the wife to apply it to the buboes 3 times a day. The ointment may slightly relieve pain, but it will not stop the progression of the disease. The husband asks how long he has left. An honest answer would be 3, maybe 4 days. Instead of that, you speak of recovery, of strengths, and of fighting against the illness. Your words are as useless as your treatments, but they are the only thing that you can offer. The children keep observing from a corner with impassive faces, showing neither hope nor comprehension. You wonder if they will also soon develop symptoms. You wonder if the wife has already been infected. You wonder if you yourself are taking the illness home each night. Before leaving, you write a prescription on a small piece of parchment. The writing is intentionally elaborate, with flourishes and Latin abbreviations few can decipher. He recommends a tincture of rosemary and wine with prayers to recite at sunset and dawn. The recipe's complexity gives it an air of legitimacy, of medical authority. But the truth is simpler. Nothing prescribed on that parchment will save this man. While you prepare to leave, you advise the family about preventative measures. Clean the house with vinegar. Burn juniper branches to purify air. Avoid melancholic thoughts, since they make the body susceptible to illness. These recommendations come from the same medical text that suggests rubbing a live chicken on buboes to extract poison. Some colleagues recommend more extreme measures. Avoid bathing, since it opens pores to illnesses. Sit near hot fires, even in summer, to burn the miasma away. Consume one's own urine mixed with molasses as protection. Carry a dead toad around the neck to absorb poison from air. You are not curing anyone. You are only part of the ritual before death. Outside, you make a mark on the doorframe, a record for city officials that control the illness's spread. It joins dozens of similar marks in the neighborhood. You have fulfilled your official duty. One more family counted in the plague registry. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows on the street. You have 3 more houses to visit before nightfall. 3 more families to treat with useless remedies. 3 more false promises to make. With each failed treatment, something hardens inside you. The gap between what you pretend to do and what you achieve grows. You are an actor in a macabre play, performing meaningless gestures while people die around you. However, you keep going from house to house, day after day. Because even useless rituals provide comfort to the dying. Even false hope is better than nothing. And because there is nothing more to do than wait for the plague to die out, consuming 1 in 3 people. You adjust the mask, its beak pointing forward like an accusation, and advance toward the next house on your list. The sun begins to descend toward the horizon as you advance through the streets. The shadows lengthen, spreading like dark fingers over cobblestones. Now you move more quickly, aware that you must complete your rounds before nightfall. Darkness brings dangers that even plague doctors fear. A woman sees you from her house's door. Her face twitches upon recognizing you, and she hurries her 2 small children inside. The door slams shut. You hear the heavy wooden bar fall into place. A prayer strong enough to go through walls begins inside. They're not protecting themselves from a plague. They're protecting themselves from you. Your black silhouette has become synonymous with death in the city. When people see your beaked mask and wide-brimmed hat, they don't think of comfort or healing. They think of last rites, death certificates, corpses piled in carts. Your arrival on their street means someone is dying or soon will. Your knocks on the door are the sound they fear most. In a tavern window, a man makes a sign against evil as you pass. Another spits in your direction, though he keeps his distance. The tavern keeper frowns and closes the shutters. Even in times of plague, taverns remain open. Fear and pain push many to drink, but they don't serve you. No one wants to share a jug with a bird of death. Medieval communities were deeply superstitious. When plague decimated towns and villages throughout Europe, people desperately sought explanations and someone to blame. The Jews were massacred, accused of poisoning wells. Cats were sacrificed, believed to be familiars of witches, and plague doctors, with their strange bird-like appearance and ineffective treatments, became objects of hope and hatred. You turn down a narrow alley to shorten the way to your patient. Halfway there, 3 figures block your path. They are young men, thin from hunger, but emboldened by cheap wine and fear. One holds a club made from a table leg. Another wields a stone the size of a fist. "My mother died yesterday, after you visited her," says the one with the club. You squeeze your doctor's cane tightly. It is your only weapon, though you have never used it as such. You slowly back away. These confrontations are becoming more common as the plague progresses, treatments fail, and the dead outnumber the living. "The plague killed your mother," you say, your voice muffled by the mask. "I try to help." Liar. The stone shoots out and passes centimeters from your head. You take her with you. Devil bird. You turn around and run, your heavy coat hindering your movements. Behind you, their footsteps echo on the stones, then fade when they give up chase. For some, you're an easy target for their pain and rage. For others, they really believe you are a spreader of disease. They're not entirely wrong. Your movements from house to house, your contaminated clothes, your unwashed hands. You may really carry death with you, but that is not what they accuse you of. They speak of curses, poison, deliberate malice. Outside a church, a priest gives a sermon to a small group gathered in the street. Places of worship remain open, though many now hold services outdoors to reduce risk of contagion. As you pass, his words become clearly audible. And these doctors, if we can call them that, move among us like the very angels of death. Their faces are a mockery of God's creatures. Their treatments are ineffective. Their presence is an omen. Is it a coincidence that death follows where they walk? Is it perhaps God's judgment for our dependence on mundane medicine instead of celestial salvation? The crowd murmurs in a sign of agreement. Several heads turn a look at you. The priest meets your gaze through the glass eyes of your mask. His expression is one of barely concealed contempt. He makes the sign of the cross, not as a blessing, but as protection from evil. The clergy and plague doctors maintained a tense relationship throughout the pandemic. While some priests collaborated with the doctors, others saw the medical professionals as competitors for the souls of the dying. When prayers failed as often as medical treatments, the blame fell on whoever was the most convenient authority figure. You slip away before the sermon incites action. Your next visit is to a rich merchant's house near the city center. Here, at least, you can expect a different reception. The educated classes usually have more faith in medicine than superstitions. But when you arrive, you are greeted by a servant at the door instead of the master. He hands you a bag of coins and a letter. The merchant has decided to hire another doctor, one who studied in Padua and claims to have a special remedy imported from Constantinople. Your services are no longer needed. It is not the first time you have been dismissed in favor of a more promising doctor. The rich have the luxury of hope, believing that someone somewhere has found an effective cure. They can afford to pursue that hope from one doctor to another. The poor only have you, with your municipal salary and useless treatments. As you put the coins away, a small crowd gathers across the street. They watch you in silence, with hostile faces. A child starts to sing a rhyme that has become popular in recent weeks. Beacon Black Plague on his back, with a living drop stops. He counts the dead on his way. The adults do not silence the child. Some join in. You are supposed to save the sick, but even the healthy fear you. Your attempts to offer comfort meet with suspicion. Your medical authority is undermined by your continued failures. Every day, as the death toll rises, the hatred grows stronger. You are the face of the plague, the embodiment of their suffering. Night falls quickly. You should go back to your house, to your empty rooms, where no one will step aside from your path or spit at you as you pass. But you have one more house on your list, one more family that counts the hours left until you arrive. They will not receive you with open arms, but they need you, not for your medicines, but for your authority to declare their loved one dead, to make official what they already know. You straighten your hat, adjust your mask, and continue down the street. The crowd reluctantly moves aside to let you pass, and their whispers follow like shadows. Devil's bird, bearer of death, raven. You keep walking, alone in a city full of people, hated, feared, and yet desperately needed. Darkness has almost fallen when you approach the last house on your list. Your steps are heavy, your body aches after a day of movement in that restrictive leather suit. The wax coat that seemed to protect you in the morning is now like a prison that retains heat, sweat, and something far worse. You're a walking reservoir of disease. The last house is small, hidden between two larger buildings. A single candle burns in the window. You knock with your cane, and a young woman opens, her face gaunt with fatigue. She isn't scared when seeing you. I was waiting for you. Inside, a man lies on a straw mattress, breathing heavily. The buboes on his neck have burst, spilling a dark liquid that stains the bedding. The smell is unbearable, even through your Herbst mask. Without them telling you, you know that it's her husband. Without examining him, you know he will not survive the night. You kneel at his side, your coat brushes the damp bedding. The leather easily absorbs the liquid, adding another layer of contamination to your dirty clothes. Your gloves are stiff from the dried fluids of previous examinations. Your cane, which today has touched dozens of inflamed lymph nodes, rests against the uncleaned wall. Medieval medicine had no concept of bacteria or viruses. The theory of germs as cause of disease would not be established until centuries later. The plague doctor's suit, although intimidating, offered almost no practical protection against Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. Instead, it turned whoever wore it into a mobile source of contagion. You check the man's pulse, the contaminated glove pressing his wrist. You listen to his breathing, leaning in so that your mask almost touches his face. You examine the erupting buboes, poking the tissue with your cane. Each action can transmit the disease from your last patient to this one, from this dying man to the next house you visit tomorrow. The plague bacteria traveled in the fleas that infested the rats, but could also spread through droplets in the air when it reached the lungs and by direct contact with infected bodily fluids. The plague doctor, who went from house to house, touching one patient after another without washing or changing equipment, became an involuntary messenger of death. Will he recover? The woman asks, though her tone suggests she already knows the answer. You shake your head slowly. Your voice sounds distant inside the mask. Make him comfortable. I can give him something for the pain. You take a small bottle of tincture from your bag. Alcohol infused with poppies. It will alleviate his suffering, but it will do nothing to stop the disease. Your fingers play with the cork. The leather gloves make fine motor control difficult. The woman takes the bottle from you. Her bare fingers brush your glove. Contact, transmission, possible infection. You note the man's condition in your ledger, your pen scratching the parchment. The book has become a vector of the disease, as it has been on infected bedding, has been touched by contaminated gloves, and has been breathed on by dying men. Tomorrow you will take it to the town hall, where clerks will handle its pages, transferring invisible bacteria to their hands, faces, and food. The cycle continues. You get up to leave, your joints numb from kneeling. As you head towards the door, you see a little girl watching from the shadows of a room. She is no more than 4 or 5 years old. She stares at you with wide, frightened eyes. You raise a hand in what you hope is a reassuring gesture. The mother sees the exchange and quickly approaches the girl, pushing her into the shadows. "Get away," she whispers, not to the girl but to you. Go away, she knows it. Perhaps not scientifically, but instinctively. She senses that your presence brings with it something more than the confirmation of death. It brings with it its cause. Outside, the night air cools your eyes through the holes in the mask. The stars have begun to appear in the darkened sky, indifferent to the suffering below. You stay a moment alone in the empty street and realize a deep exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness. Your clothes weigh, not only because of the weight of the leather and the wax, but because of the invisible load of the disease. Each fiber has been exposed to plague. The hem of your coat has dragged through contaminated streets. The beak of your mask has filled with the breath of the sick and dying. Your cane has touched more infected flesh than any other object in the city, and tomorrow you will take it to new houses, to new victims. Some plague doctors try to lessen this risk. They burn their clothes regularly, though few could afford daily changes. Some wash their hands with vinegar, believing its acidic nature would purify them. Others refuse to touch patients directly, using their canes for all exams. But these precautions were based more on the miasma theory of diseases than knowledge of bacteria. They were gestures of security more than effective measures. You begin the long road home through the dark streets. Your route takes you through houses that you visited earlier in the week. Several now have death marks on their doors, new since your visit. You can't help but wonder how many of those deaths you will have accelerated with your exams, your contaminated equipment, your displacements between sick homes. It is a terrible burden to bear. To suspect that the mere fact of trying to help may cause harm, that under the suit, behind the mask, you are not an adversary of death, but its accomplice, its carrier, its vector. You pass a public fountain and stop, overwhelmed by a sudden need to clean yourself. You take off a glove and immerse your bare hand in the cold water, watching the day's dirt move from your skin. But you know this superficial cleaning is useless against microscopic killers that made your suit their home. The water from the fountain will now carry your contamination to all who drink from it tomorrow. You withdraw your hand as if you had burned yourself, and you put the glove back on hastily. There is no escaping this cycle. There is no way to break the chain of transmission when its existence is unknown. You're a healer who spreads disease, a doctor who brings death home. The plague may be already inside you, and if not today, maybe tomorrow or the day after. The probabilities increase with each house you enter, each patient you touch. Your protective suit has become your greatest vulnerability, a contagion collection system that never leaves. You walk again, your shadow lengthens like that of a bird in the light of the crescent moon. The city sleeps restlessly around you. Unaware, its designated guardian carries the danger it most fears. You survive the day, but the plague travels with you, patient and invisible, waiting for the moment to transform you from doctor into patient, from recorder to statistic. The small room you call home is above a candle shop on a quiet street. The smell of tallow and wax from below usually permeates everything. But tonight, your own stench dominates all. You climb the narrow stairs. Each step and effort exhaust you to the bone. Inside, a single candle burns on a simple wooden table. The flame casts long shadows on the sparse furniture. A bed, a chair, a trunk for your few belongings. There is no personal detail adorning the walls. There is no family member waiting to welcome you. Plague doctors rarely maintained close relationships. The risk was too great, the burden too heavy to share. You begin the laborious process of removing your protective suit. First, you carefully place the hat on its support. Then, the mask, its beak still filled with herbs that no longer give off any aroma. Your face feels strange without it, exposed and vulnerable after a day behind a leather mask. The red marks wrinkle your skin where the straps dug in. Your fingers, clumsy from exhaustion, struggle on the robe's closures. The waxed leather sticks to the clothes underneath, reluctant to let go. When it finally comes off, the linen shirt is soaked with sweat and stained with fluids whose origin you prefer not to contemplate. Each garment of the plague doctor's suit was to be cleaned regularly, fumigated with herbs, and aired in the sun. But the reality differed. The leather was hard to wash properly. Processing the suit took hours that exhausted doctors did not have. Many wore the same clothes for days, even weeks, without cleaning them thoroughly. You should burn these clothes and start fresh tomorrow. But new leather is expensive, and your city salary, although better than most, has its limits. Instead, you clean the coat with vinegar, hang it near the window where the night air can remove some stench, and promise yourself that tomorrow you will do better. The room seems both empty and crowded. Empty of company, crowded with the invisible specters of those you attended today. Their faces remain in your mind as you pour water from a pitcher into a basin and begin to wash yourself. The water turns gray, then black, as you scrub your hands, face, and neck. No matter how much you wash, it never seems enough. Loneliness was a constant companion of the plague doctor. The nature of the work imposed isolation. Many professionals lived in designated housing, away from the population. Others, like you, rented rooms whose owners were willing to accept the risk in exchange for a higher payment. Family members often refused contact for fear of contagion. Friends walked away, uncomfortable with your daily proximity to death. You eat a simple meal of bread and cheese that the chandler's wife left at your door. She no longer brings it in person, not since the plague's arrival in the city. The food has no taste. You force yourself to swallow, knowing you need strength for tomorrow. Tonight, you will not sleep easily. You never do. Every time you close your eyes, you see the faces of today's patients. You hear their labored breathing, their pleas for relief, their questions about survival. You gave them false hope, knowing the truth was too cruel to say. Most plague doctors did not survive major outbreaks. Statistics varied by location and period, but mortality rates for medical professionals were staggeringly high. In some cities, several plague doctors were appointed in rapid succession, as each succumbed to the disease they were treating. The impressive protective suit offered little real defense against infection. You cough then again. It's a normal reflex, you tell yourself. You're just clearing your throat after breathing through a mask all day. It is not the first symptom of disease, nor the beginning of the end. But you can't help but check your armpits, your neck, run fingers over your lymph nodes, looking for any swelling, any tenderness. There is nothing. Not tonight. A feeling of relief washes over you, followed by shame. How many more times will you wake up looking immediately for signs of buboes on your body? For the death sentence that seems just out of reach. A noise from outside draws you to window. A cart slowly advances through the street. The lanterns hanging on the sides cast a lugubrious light on the cobblestones. It is the death cart making its nightly rounds. Two men walk at its side, their faces covered with cloths, shouting the well-known refrain. Take out your dead. A door opens. A wrapped bundle is passed to the collectors. There is no ceremony, no prolonged farewells. Only another corpse for the ever larger pits outside the city walls. Someday that could be you. Not the collector, but the collected. An unnamed bundle transported without ceremony, buried without a headstone in a mass grave. If the plague takes you, there will be no family to mourn you, no friends to remember your name, no colleagues to record your death in the city records. The plague doctors were as disposable as the herbs in their masks, replaced and forgotten just as easily. You move from the window and turn off the candle. Darkness envelopes the room, a temporary escape from the visual reminders of reality. But the sounds remain. The rumble of the death cart, the somber announcement of the messenger, the occasional sob from a house that gives up its dead. In the darkness, you allow yourself a moment of sincere emotion, something you can't show on your rounds. Fear, not only of death, which eventually comes to us all, but of this particular death, painful, ugly, and completely lonely, of joining the anonymous dead in the mass graves, of disappearing without a trace or memory. The medieval mentality considered the plague as divine punishment, as the work of malevolent forces, as a result of planetary alignments or poisoned air. What it could not conceive was the arbitrary nature of infection, the randomness of survival and death. For every person who contracted the plague and died, another could be repeatedly exposed, yet never get sick. There was no pattern, no justice, no sense in who lived or who died. When you finally fall asleep, your thoughts drift toward the rounds of the next day. The same streets, the same procedures, the same useless treatments, the same risk passed from house to house like an unwanted gift, the same loneliness. Maybe tomorrow is the day you develop symptoms. Maybe it's in a week or a month. Maybe you are one of the lucky few who somehow survive the outbreak intact. But statistics and experience suggest otherwise. The plague has taken most of your predecessors in this position. It continues to take your colleagues from neighboring districts. The city maintains a list of replacement plague doctors, ready to be appointed when the current ones fall ill. One morning, you simply won't wake up, or you'll wake up and notice the telltale swellings beginning and a fever rising. Your landlord will find your body, call the death cart, and rent your room to the next plague doctor appointed to take your place. Your body will be incinerated along with the rest. No name, no grave. As consciousness fades, one last thought surfaces in your exhausted mind. Maybe this is mercy, to disappear completely, to leave no one behind, to mourn, to take your failures and your contamination to the grave without harming anyone, to end the cycle of useless treatments and false hopes. Sleep finally claims you, deep and dreamless. Tomorrow awaits with its beak-shaped mask and its duties wrapped in black. Its procession of dying faces. Its slow accumulation of risk. One more day of walking among the disease, of breathing death, of surviving when so many do not. Until the day when you don't either. The centuries pass onward. The massive tombs outside the city walls fall into oblivion. They are paved over with new roads, new buildings, new lives. The plague that once emptied streets and filled death carts fades into history books and academic articles. The world moves on, as always. But something remains, a silhouette, a memory in the shape of a bird. The mask of the plague doctor survives in museum collections, carefully preserved behind glass. Its empty eye sockets stare at visitors who curiously observe this relic of medieval medicine. They touch their phones, take photos, and move to the next exhibition. Few stop to think about the person who once wore something like that, who sweated behind the leather, who struggled breathing through the herb-filled beak. In the celebrations of the Venetian Carnival, revelers wear elaborate versions of the plague doctor's mask, decorated with gold leaf and colored paint. They pose for photographs in St. Mark's Square. They are beautiful nightmares against ancient architecture. The mask that once meant suffering now represents mystery, intrigue, celebration. The transformation is complete, from medical instrument to party costume. Online stores sell plague doctor masks as Halloween accessories, advertising them with cheerful descriptions. Scare your friends with this authentic-looking costume. Children dress as plague doctors for costume contests, their little bodies wrapped in miniature black robes, their innocent faces hidden behind beaked masks. They have no idea what that suit meant in its day, of the death it witnessed, of the death it often preceded. Historical reenactments feature actors dressed as plague doctors reciting scripts about miasma theory and herbal remedies. They pose with their staffs, show their tools, and explain their techniques. It's all very educational, very aseptic. There is no mention of fear, hatred, contamination, loneliness. There is no mention of anonymous death in a rented room above a chandler's shop. In video games, plague doctors appear as mysterious characters, sometimes villains, sometimes healers with magical powers. In horror movies, their silhouettes loom in fog-shrouded streets, threatening protagonists with their inhuman appearance. In fantasy art, they stand in the middle of apocalyptic landscapes, their beak-shaped profiles silhouetted against burning skies. The internet has adopted the plague doctor as a meme, a resource for black humor about disease and death. Social networks are filled with stylized illustrations every time a new disease appears in the headlines. The bird-shaped mask becomes a symbol far removed from its historical reality, an aesthetic choice rather than a desperate and failed attempt at protection. Comic conventions feature attendees dressed in elaborate plague doctor costumes, posing dramatically for photographers and winning awards for their craftsmanship and creativity. Their costumes are works of art, with perfect leatherwork, masks sculpted in great detail, and staffs carved with intricate patterns. They are beautiful in a way that no real plague doctor ever was. Tattoo artists capture the distinctive silhouette on the skin of those who want it. The curved beak, the round eyes, the wide-brimmed hat. The image joins other symbols of mortality in modern iconography, alongside skulls, ravens, and hourglasses. The plague doctor becomes immortal through artistic reproduction, enjoying the memory denied to those who actually wore the mask. Historians and medical scholars write articles analyzing the plague doctor's suit, debating its effectiveness and tracing its evolution throughout different outbreaks. Academic conferences include presentations on the cultural significance of the plague doctor in various regions of Europe. All very scholarly, very far from the lived experience of those who walked through dying cities and recorded the dead in soaked ledgers. But what would you think of this strange afterlife for your profession? Of this transformation of your daily reality into symbol and entertainment? What would you think of children dressed like you for fun? Of the revelers who wear decorative versions of your breathing apparatus, your image reproduced as decoration? Perhaps you would be puzzled by this fascination with the ornaments of your profession, while the essence of your experience remains largely unexplored. The loneliness of returning to empty rooms each night, the fear of checking every morning for symptoms, the weight of useless knowledge in the face of an unstoppable disease, the horror of suspecting you're spreading what you try to contain, knowing that your death will go unnoticed and that your body will be discarded without ceremony. Or perhaps find bitter satisfaction in the cultural persistence of the plague doctor. Your profession may have failed in its mission, treating the plague, saving the sick, protecting the healthy, but managing to engrave its image in collective memory. Failed doctors, but symbols successful. The mask with a beak designed to protect against the miasma that did not exist turned out to be useless against bacteria that had not yet been discovered. But it protected something completely different, the humanity of the plague doctor. Behind the leather, the doctor could keep a professional distance. Behind the glass eyes, tears could fall unseen. Behind the beak, expressions of horror and impotence remained private. Perhaps that is why the image endures, not because plague doctors were effective healers, but because they embodied humanity's response to an overwhelming disaster. The suit represents both the futility of our defenses against nature's most devastating forces and our determination to try anyway, to impose order through ritual, to face death with professional composure, even when we know we cannot win. The modern world has its own plague doctors, medical professionals who face new epidemics with protective suits and respirators, making rounds through hospital wards instead of city streets. Like their medieval counterparts, they record symptoms, administer treatments, and maintain a professional distance while witnessing suffering at close range. Unlike their predecessors, they have germ theory, antibiotics, and knowledge of contagiousness to guide efforts. However, some things have not changed. The isolation of loved ones for fear of contagion, the psychological burden of treating a disease that can also kill them, the transformation of individuals into symbols in the public eye. The weight of the protective equipment may be different, but the weight of responsibility remains the same. So perhaps the legacy is not entirely false. The image of the plague doctor endures not as a historical curiosity, but as a reminder of the persistence of humanity in the face of overwhelming mortality. The curved beak points forward through the centuries like a question. What would you do when facing death on an unimaginable scale? Would you flee, or would you stay? Would you put on the mask, knowing its protection is largely illusory? Would you make your rounds knowing your treatments are ineffective? Modern eyes may see only the strange silhouette, the theatrical costume, the memorable profile. They may not see the person inside, scared, exhausted, alone, often young and unprepared for the burden that has been placed on them. Perhaps they do not understand that under the appearance of authority hid a painful awareness of impotence. That behind the mask of death, there was someone desperately trying to keep it at bay. You became a symbol, but never a hero. The image of the plague doctor achieves what he could not. A kind of immortality, persistence beyond the grave. Your name has been lost. Your grave is nameless. Your death records are filed and forgotten. But your silhouette remains easily recognizable, reproduced endlessly. The bird-headed figure that stands on the edge of disaster, neither fleeing nor overcoming it, simply bearing witness and recording the number of victims. Perhaps that is a sufficient legacy to be remembered, not for success, but for showing up anyway, for walking towards suffering when others fled, for trying to heal even when healing seemed impossible. The true legacy of the plague doctor is not the mask that endures in carnivals and costumes. It is the decision made every morning to put it on. In the dark corners of medieval society, far from resplendent courts and honorable knights, lurked figures that we now idealize as assassins. But forget all that you have seen in movies and video games. Reality was far darker, more desperate, and ultimately more tragic. Unlike the elegant, trained assassins of modern fantasy, medieval assassins were not born into secret guilds or trained from childhood in mountain fortresses. They were desperate, condemned men with nothing to lose, former soldiers fallen into disgrace, criminals seeking protection, outcasts with skills, but no place in society. People pushed to the margins where morality becomes flexible and survival prevails over conscience. These men were not chosen for their exceptional combat skill or intelligence. What made them valuable was their expendability. When powerful men needed to eliminate someone without leaving a trace, they looked for those who could disappear afterward, either blending into the shadows of society or disappearing forever. Recruitment took place in taverns and prisons, in debtors' quarters, and among the homeless. A whisper of opportunity, a chance to earn money or escape punishment. Perhaps an opportunity to take revenge on a society that had marginalized them. The promises were vague, yet tempting. Wealth, protection, perhaps even respect. The dangers were rarely mentioned. In some exceptional cases, such as that of the infamous Nazari Ismailis, often called Hashishin, recruitment took on religious dimensions. They were not common mercenaries, but devout followers of a cause, believing that their actions served a higher purpose. However, even here, most recruits came from poor backgrounds, attracted by the promise of paradise, both in this life and in the next. The training was not the years-long martial excellence regime that we imagine today. Most assassins received minimal instruction, enough to approach a target and attack effectively. They learned to go unnoticed, to appear harmless, to get close enough for a sword or poison to do its job. Some already had prior skills. Former soldiers knew how to kill. Thieves knew how to move stealthily. And servants knew how to move invisibly in the presence of the powerful. The most important thing was not skill, but reliability. Would they fulfill their mission? Would they remain silent if captured? The perfect assassin was not the most skilled fighter, but the most obedient tool. Someone who would sacrifice everything, including their life, to complete the mission. Someone whose loyalty surpassed their instinct for survival. And so began the dark career of the medieval assassin, not with glory or special powers, but with desperation and manipulation. They were not elite agents, but pawns in the games of the powerful. The first lesson they learned was not how to kill, but how little their own lives were worth to those who employed them. The shadows could offer them escape from poverty or punishment, but rarely provided what they actually promised. For most, becoming an assassin was not the start of a legendary career. It was simply exchanging one form of desperation for another, often more deadly. Once recruited, the real transformation began. Medieval assassins underwent training unlike anything shown in modern entertainment. It was not about acrobatics or elegant sword fights. It was psychological conditioning designed to create obedient assassins who would follow orders without question and accept their likely death. For groups like the legendary Hashishin, indoctrination began with isolation. Separated from their previous lives, the recruits entered a world in which their only reality was what their teachers told them. Religious fanaticism became a powerful tool. Leaders like Hasanai Sabah understood that men would do for faith what they would not do for money. The recruits heard stories about the paradise that awaited those who died in the service of the cause, a powerful motivation in an era of unwavering religious beliefs. Some historical accounts describe how the Hashishin leaders drugged the recruits with hashish and took them to elaborate hidden gardens within the walls of a fortress. Upon awakening in these artificial paradises, with food, wine, and women, the recruits were told that they had glimpsed the afterlife that awaited loyal followers. Whether these stories are entirely true remains a matter of debate, but the psychological manipulation was real and effective. For secular assassins, training focused more on practical skills and fear. They learned to move silently, to identify poisons, and quickly attack vital zones. Their teachers were not martial arts instructors, but experienced assassins who taught brutal efficiency. Why learn elaborate techniques with the sword when a simple knife between the ribs was enough? Why master dozens of weapons when only a hidden blade was needed? The physical training emphasized subtlety over strength. They spent hours practicing how to hide weapons in clothing, how to approach targets without arousing suspicion, and how to blend into crowds. The assassins learned to impersonate servants, beggars, pilgrims, or merchants, roles that guaranteed access without attracting attention. The best weapon was not the sharpest dagger, but the most convincing disguise. The mental conditioning proved to be as important as physical skills. The manipulators deliberately dehumanized targets, describing them as obstacles instead of people. Some assassins never even learned why their targets had to die. They simply received orders. This separation from the reasons motivating the assassination made it easier to act without hesitation when the time came. The most effective psychological tool was fatalism. The assassins were taught to accept death as an inevitable result of their profession. Success meant a possible escape, but probably persecution during the rest of their lives. Failure meant a sure and often painful execution. By accepting this reality from the beginning, they could act without the hesitation that fear provokes. This brutal psychological conditioning created assassins very different from our modern image of a master assassin. They were not proud professionals, but broken men rebuilt with a single purpose. They did not boast or brag. They did not collect trophies. They simply waited for orders, carried them out, and hoped to survive one more day in a world that considered them little more than expendable tools. With mind and body forged as a lethal instrument, the medieval assassin now faced the task itself, the commission that would probably define the brief remainder of his life. The orders arrived suddenly, often without prior notice or possibility of choice. A messenger appeared with sealed instructions or a whispered name. For those who worked in organized groups like the Hashishin, the orders could come directly from their leader or through a chain of trusted intermediaries. 4 solitary assassins linked to noble houses or political factions, a butler or advisor could deliver the order with barely veiled threats if they hesitated. The most striking aspect of these missions was how little information the assassins received. Modern fiction portrays elaborate briefings with detailed data about the target. Reality did not offer that luxury. Most assassins only knew what was strictly necessary, who had to die, where he was approximately, and when the act had to be carried out. The motive remained a mystery. It was not simply about cruelty, but about a calculated strategy. An assassin who knew too much became a liability. Once the target was identified, the planning began. Far from the elaborate plans of modern thriller novels, the planning of medieval assassinations was meticulously methodical. Days or weeks could be spent simply observing the target from afar. Where was he going? Who accompanied him? What patterns were repeated in his movements? An official could visit the same church every Sunday. A merchant could travel the same route to his office. A noble could hunt in the same forest on specific days. This surveillance was carried out without modern technology or networks of informants. Instead, the assassins relied on patience and anonymity. They became beggars on the corners, day laborers working in the nearby fields, pilgrims loitering near the churches, or merchants selling their products in the markets. Positions that made them practically invisible to the powerful people they watched. The social hierarchy of the Middle Ages favored them. The rich and powerful rarely noticed those beneath them. Information gathered through observation proved invaluable. How many guards accompanied the target? Did their routes vary? Who had access to their food and drink? Were there predictable moments when they could be vulnerable or alone? Was the target particularly tired or relaxed? Did they accept gifts or food from strangers? Each detail shaped the approach. The most dangerous part of this phase was loneliness. Unlike modern operations with backup teams and extraction plans, medieval assassins worked alone. There was no support team watching afar, no rescue if captured. Any mistake during this phase could jeopardize everything. Being seen observing too closely or asking many questions about the target or appearing too often in the same place could raise suspicions. As the plan took shape, so did the method. A sword was reliable but required close contact. Poison offered distance, but needed access to food or drink. A crossbow arrow could reach the target from afar, but made escape difficult. The choice depended not only on effectiveness, but also on the chances of subsequent survival, although that consideration often seemed secondary to their employers. Weapons and tools were gathered discreetly. Poisons were prepared from plants or minerals. Swords were sharpened and hidden in canes under cloaks. Disguises were perfected. Escape routes were plotted. Potential obstacles were identified. All without attracting attention, all without help. As the day approached, the assassin found himself alone with his thoughts and fears. There would be no glory in success, only the hope of survival. Failure meant not only death, but often torture first. The psychological weight of this reality tested their conditioning. Those who hesitated did not usually survive to receive a second mission. Those who succeeded often wished they hadn't. With the plan taking shape, the medieval assassin entered what was perhaps the toughest phase of his mission. The infiltration and the agonizing wait for the perfect moment to attack. This was where many failed, not for lack of skill, but for the psychological strain of maintaining the deception. The disguise was the assassin's most powerful weapon, far more valuable than any sword or poison. Unlike modern fiction, with its elaborate costumes and facial prosthetics, medieval disguises relied on social invisibility. The most effective disguise was not to completely change appearance, but to assume a role that others overlooked. Servants moved through noble houses unseen. Monks traveled without raising suspicion. Beggars sat for days in the same place, watching and listening as passers-by looked away. The assassin could spend weeks adapting to the chosen role before approaching the target. A false identity as a servant required learning the proper manners, speech, and deference. Posing as a merchant meant understanding the details of the trade well enough to discuss them convincingly. Each role required total immersion. A single slip could give everything away. For those targeting the nobility, being part of the staff offered the best access. This could mean starting at the lowest levels, such as stable boy, kitchen worker, or gardeners, and gradually rising to positions closer to the target. Patient assassins could serve for months before attacking, gaining trust and access while observing from within. The Roman concept of the trusted slave, who suddenly became lethal, was a recurring nightmare for the powerful throughout the Middle Ages. The religious disguises proved especially effective. In an era of faith, few questioned the motives of the pilgrims or friars. The monasteries offered refuge. The nobles welcomed religious figures to their homes, and the cities opened their doors to those wearing religious habits. The stories tell of assassins disguised as monks who got close enough to kill even well-protected rulers. For targets rarely seen publicly, the assassin could pose as someone the target would summon. Healers for the sick, entertainers for the bored, or messengers bearing news. The advantage of such disguises was proximity to the target, though they required a convincing performance under scrutiny. Once in position, the waiting began. Medieval assassination was based not on quick blows, but on patient opportunity. Days or weeks could pass before the perfect moment presented itself. A moment when guards were distracted, when the target was alone, when escape seemed possible. This wait tested the assassin's mental preparation more than physical challenge. During this time, the assassin could become a familiar figure within the environment. The servant who always tended a particular garden. The beggar who sat on the same corner daily. The merchant who entertained the target when passing by regularly. Familiarity bred not contempt, but invisibility. People stopped noticing what they saw every day. For those using poison, proximity to food or drink was essential. Kitchen workers, cupbearers, or waiters at banquets had unique opportunities, though such positions were often reserved for trusted people. Alternatively, poisoners could contaminate wells, food stores, or even gifts like wines or sweets sent to the target. The psychological burden of waiting is not to be underestimated. Alone among enemies, constantly alert, but appearing relaxed, balancing preparation and patience. These contradictions wore the mind down. Sleep became irregular. Each interaction carried the risk of discovery, and the constant anticipation of violence took its toll. Many assassins likely suffered from what we recognize today as extreme anxiety or combat stress, although there were no names for such conditions in the Middle Ages. As days turned into weeks, the assassin's determination was tested. Those who could not withstand the pressure, who acted too soon out of impatience or fear, rarely survived to tell their story. Those who succeeded maintained their facade until the perfect moment arrived. When opportunity and preparation finally converged, after days or weeks of surveillance, planning, and waiting, the moment arrived. The perfect convergence of opportunity and preparation. The vulnerable target, the escape route clear, the witnesses few or distracted. This was the crucial moment to which all previous efforts had been directed. A moment that would last only a few seconds, but that would define the rest of the assassin's probably short existence. Medieval assassinations fell into two broad categories: those aiming to send a message, and those intending to remain a mystery. Each demanded a different approach, different weapons, and different considerations for escape. Each carried its own rewards and risks. The choice rarely corresponded to the assassin, but was dictated by whoever commissioned the assassination. Public assassinations were theatrical acts designed to terrorize or send political messages. The target was killed during a ceremony, banquet, or public appearance, moments in which many would witness the death. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192 at the hands of Hashishin assassins occurred in a crowded market in Tyre. The assassin approached disguised as a monk, attacked with precision, and caused instant chaos. These assassinations were demonstrations of power, warnings to enemies, or demonstrations that no one was safe. Weapons for public assassinations had to be effective at close range and lethal. Daggers were common, particularly the misrored, a narrow blade designed to slide between armor plates or ribs. Some assassins used poison blades to ensure even superficial wounds were deadly. Speed was essential. The target had to die before guards intervened. Precision was fundamental. One had to strike in vital areas such as the neck, the heart, or the base of the skull. There would not be a second chance. These public assassinations often meant accepting capture. The assassin could have an escape plan, disappear into the crowd, use smoke or fire as distractions, or count on accomplices who created diversions. But most understood that survival was unlikely. That is why religious or ideological indoctrination mattered. The assassin needed to believe that his death served a greater purpose, whether it was a celestial reward or an earthly political change. Private assassinations, however, were designed to create confusion and uncertainty. The goal was to find the target dead in chambers, poisoned during a private meal, or drowned in the bathtub. The goal was not only to kill, but also to hide who was responsible, perhaps even making the death seem natural or accidental. These assassinations had different political ends, eliminating rivals without creating martyrs, removing obstacles without revealing beneficiaries. Poison was the preferred method for such assassinations. Medieval poisons came from natural sources: belladonna, hemlock, aconite, arsenic extracted from minerals. The effects varied greatly, from rapid, painful deaths to gradual illnesses mimicking natural diseases. Assassins learned to select poisons for the desired outcome: immediate death that would cause alarm versus slow deterioration that would arouse less suspicion. Administering poison required different skills than handling swords. The assassin might need to infiltrate kitchens, access private cellars, or contaminate personal objects like clothing or candles. Again, patience was crucial, as was knowledge of the target's habits. Did they have tasters? Did they share meals with others who could not be harmed? Was their food prepared separate from the rest of the house? Every detail determined the approach. Other covert methods consisted of simulating accidental deaths, weakening saddle girths before hunts, manipulating stairs or railings, or creating conditions for drowning. These methods required meticulous planning and mechanical knowledge, but offered the advantage of avoiding suspicion. In an era of frequent accidents and limited forensics, these deaths rarely aroused suspicion. The moment of assassination itself was surprisingly undramatic in successful assassinations. A quick stab with a knife, a poison cup delivered without ceremony, a target abandoned alone in a compromised environment. Effectiveness lay not in elaborate combats or dramatic confrontations, but in the sudden application of lethal force without warning. The target had little time to understand what was happening, let alone defend himself. The best assassinations were those in which the target never saw the assassin or realized he was being attacked until too late. For those who used knives, the attack had to be decisive and precise. Multiple stabs indicated panic or lack of skill, reducing escape chances. The most effective assassins struck once, targeting specific vulnerabilities: the throat, the kidney, under the arm to reach the heart, or the skull base. Such precision required a knowledge of human anatomy uncommon during the Middle Ages. This knowledge was specifically passed from experienced assassins to apprentices. If poison was chosen, the timing of administration usually occurred long before death. The assassin could add the substance to food or drink and be far away when the effects manifested. This created a separation between the act and its consequences, providing both a practical escape distance and a psychological distance from the assassination itself. Some poisons acted quickly, producing symptoms within minutes. Others took hours or even days, allowing the assassin to establish alibis or leave the area. The aftermath of the assassination brought its own challenges. A public assassin had to escape through a panic-stricken crowd. The former guards, now alerted, watched over a cordoned area. The precious seconds after the blow decided everything. Some assassins resorted to disguise, blending among the crowd as just another witness. Others used speed, with escape routes planned through alleys and sewers. Some used distraction tactics like fires, false alarms, or accomplices, creating disturbances elsewhere. For covert assassins, the challenge differed. Maintaining normal behavior while the death was discovered, showing appropriate shock or pain, avoiding any suspicious behavior that could relate them to it. This required remarkable psychological control, especially if the assassin had built relationships with the target or their family during infiltration. Servants who poisoned their masters were expected to mourn them. Guards who facilitated the murders could join the search for non-existent intruders. In both cases, blood presented practical problems. Medieval clothing absorbed it, marking the assassin. The cleaning methods of that time could not easily remove bloodstains. Public assassins had to hide bloody weapons and hands during their escape. Covert assassins had to ensure that the blood did not reveal their involvement. This partly explains why poison became so popular. It eliminated the bloody evidence left by bladed weapons. The psychological impact of killing at point-blank range should not be underestimated. Modern research on the psychology of combat suggests that human beings have an inherent resistance to killing others, especially face-to-face. Medieval assassins were not immune to this human response. The extensive training to which they were subjected was designed in part to overcome this natural hesitation, to make them capable of killing personally and intimately. Some probably dissociated during the act, mentally separating themselves from what their bodies were doing. Despite all the planning, training, and preparation, the assassination itself occupied only a few moments in the assassin's journey. Brief, brutal, and irreversible. A dividing line between before and after, if there was an after. Many assassins did not survive their missions. Those who did carried not only the memory of the act, but also the awareness that they were now a burden to those who had hired them. Successful assassination did not mark the end of danger, but the beginning of a new and possibly more dangerous phase, escape and its consequences. The sword had struck. The poison had been administered. The target had fallen. But for the medieval assassin, the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Escaping the scene represented a challenge that many would not survive, regardless of how perfectly they had executed the assassination. Unlike modern assassins, who have escape vehicles, support teams, and technology to help them disappear, medieval assassins faced overwhelming odds. The moment a high-value target fell, an entire city could be locked down. The doors were closed, the guards mobilized, strangers interrogated, and rewards offered for any information. The entire machinery of medieval justice and revenge was set in motion, with the assassin trapped somewhere in its gears. For those who had carried out public assassinations, the first moments after the hit determined everything. The initial impact of the crowd provided precious seconds to move away from the fallen target before screams began. Pre-planned routes through narrow alleys, buildings with multiple exits, or sewers could offer temporary hiding. Reportedly, some assassins used smoke bombs made of resin and sulfur to create confusion, while others relied on accomplices who created distractions elsewhere. Church sanctuaries offered a desperate option. Medieval law recognized the right of asylum, whereby fugitives could claim protection within church walls. Although this could avoid immediate execution, it often led to permanent exile or eventual capture when hunger or thirst forced the assassin to leave. Few churches risked their reputation to protect known assassins for long, especially those who had attacked powerful figures. Waterways offered escape opportunities in coastal or riverside cities. Pre-prepared boats could take the assassins away from immediate pursuit. The assassin could disguise himself as a fisherman, merchant, or pilgrim, blending in with the river traffic before the guards organized searches of boats. Venice, with its network of canals and its access to the sea, was especially difficult for authorities trying to contain fugitive assassins. For assassins who had poisoned their targets, the escape took different forms. Since death usually occurred hours or days after the poison was administered, the assassin could simply leave before suspicion arose. However, when investigations began, they faced different challenges. The houses were closed up. All people with access to the victim were interrogated. Torture was used freely to obtain confessions. The surviving tasters were investigated for complicity. Medieval justice worked with evidentiary criteria that today would seem worrying to us. Mere suspicion could lead to interrogation under torture. Proximity to the victim was cause for accusation. Foreigners, or those who did not have powerful protectors, became convenient scapegoats. In this environment, Even the murderers who had escaped from the scene of the events were often seen persecuted, identified by informers who sought rewards or betrayed by accomplices under coercion. If captured, the murderers faced execution methods specifically designed to maximize suffering and to serve as a public warning. Hanging was deemed too pious for murderers. Instead, they could be beheaded, quartered, drawn and quartered, or burned alive, informers who sought rewards, or betrayed by accomplices under coercion. If captured, the murderers faced execution methods specifically designed to maximize suffering and serve as a public warning. Hanging was considered too pious for murderers. Instead, they could face the wheel, where limbs were broken before being tied to a wheel and displayed. Others were quartered, their bodies torn apart after being hanged. Some were boiled or subjected to progressive amputation before the blow. Even those who managed to escape the immediate area faced a life as persecuted fugitives. Medieval communities were small. Foreigners attracted attention, and travelers were interrogated. Descriptions of wanted murderers were spread along trade routes. Merchants, pilgrims, and messengers transmitted news and warnings. The distinctive features of foreigners made them especially vulnerable to being recognized. A murderer could escape from the city and be identified in a town 10 miles away by someone who had heard descriptions from travelers. The safest escape usually consisted of completely abandoning the territory and crossing to regions where news arrived slowly or different political powers could offer protection. Murderers who had worked for a kingdom could flee to rival kingdoms where their skills bought protection. Those who had killed for religious causes could seek refuge among sympathetic communities. But these trips involved their own dangers. Roads plagued by bandits, suspicious border guards, and the constant risk of betrayal. Perhaps most dangerous was that successful murderers often found those who hired them were unwilling to risk discovery. Many employers considered murderers disposable assets whose survival was a risk. After carrying out the task entrusted to them, murderers could find themselves persecuted not only by the victim's allies, but also by their own former employers. Historical records suggest that many murderers did not meet their end at the hands of the authorities, but through the silent by those who had hired their services. The Hasheen, more organized, developed systems to protect their members after missions. The murderers returned to mountainous fortresses controlled by their order, where the armies that pursued them faced difficult sieges in hostile terrain. This protection came at the price of lifelong service and from the outside world's isolation. Even here, the murderers remained prisoners of their organization. Their knowledge made them too dangerous to live normally. This reality, the almost impossibility of escaping and surviving, determined the way in which medieval murderers approached their missions. Many adopted a fatalistic mentality, considering themselves dead when they accepted the commission. This psychological preparation allowed them to act without hesitation caused by the survival instinct, which paradoxically made them more effective. Those who expected to die feared neither capture nor punishment. For the few who survived multiple missions, life became a succession of new identities and constant surveillance, with the certainty that any stranger could be looking for them. They lived as ghosts on society's margins, unable to establish bonds or take root, and always attentive to any sign of recognition or persecution. Their experience made them valuable, but also dangerous. Few found anything like peace or security in the years left to them. Therefore, the story of medieval murderers rarely ended with a successful escape and a comfortable retirement. More often than not on the gallows, under the instruments of torture, or by the knife of a former ally in the darkness. They were weapons that were used and discarded, and their final reward was not gold or glory, but an unnamed grave or public dismemberment as a warning to others who might follow in their footsteps. For the few medieval murderers who survived their mission and managed to escape, the consequences brought not reward but a series of new dangers. Having fulfilled their purpose, these murderers would discover the truth of their profession. They had always been expendable, tools that were discarded once they were no longer useful. The promised payments often never materialized. The gold left in hiding disappeared. The safe houses were abandoned or watched. The contacts disappeared. The carefully prepared ships sailed without them. The betrayal was not personal, but practical. An assassin who survived knew too much, could identify employers, and could be captured and tortured for information. In the calculation of medieval power, an alive assassin represented an unacceptable loose end. This abandonment was not only breaking a contract, but a death sentence. Without the promised resources and protection, the assassins found themselves abandoned in hostile territory, pursued by authorities, and without any possibility of escape. Some were silently eliminated by the same people who hired them, stabbed in their sleep or poisoned in meals intended to celebrate their success. Others were abandoned to the mercy of the city guards or the vengeful allies of their victims. Those who somehow managed to evade both their former employers and their enemies faced a life of perpetual flight. Medieval society offered few places to hide for long. The communities were small and close-knit. Strangers were noticeable and watched. An assassin could change appearance, adopt new identities, learn new trades, but constant vigilance wore down both body and mind. Many succumbed to psychological stress, resorting to alcohol or other substances that dulled their awareness and eventually led them to make mistakes and be captured. Some assassins tried to use their knowledge to protect themselves, threatening to expose those who had hired them if they were persecuted. This rarely ended well. Medieval powers did not respond to blackmail with submission, but with overwhelming force. An assassin reckless enough to utter such threats could find entire families or communities punished for their actions, as an example of what happened to those who betrayed powerful patrons. For assassins with political motivations, such as the Hasheen, the consequences were somewhat different. Their organizational structure provided them with greater protection, but at the cost of total commitment. Successful assassins returned to isolated fortresses where they lived out their days in the service of the cause. Unable to leave the order or establish a life outside it, they gained status within their closed community, but remained prisoners of their knowledge and skills, forever separated from the outside world. The psychological aftermath proved as devastating as the practical challenges, and many assassins suffered what we would recognize today as post-traumatic stress. Nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and intrusive memories haunted those who had killed up close. Medieval societies had no concept of mental health treatment. These symptoms were considered weaknesses of character or, more sinisterly, divine punishment for their actions. Some sought redemption through religion, believing that sufficient penance could save their souls. They became hermits in remote areas, entered monasteries with false identities, or embarked on dangerous pilgrimages to sacred places. Church doctrine allowed forgiveness even for the most serious sins, but the psychological burden was not so easily relieved. Records tell of former assassins who spent decades in self-imposed suffering, seeking absolution that never felt complete. Others fully embraced their abilities and became mercenaries or bodyguards for new masters. Once the line of murder was crossed, subsequent violence came more easily. These individuals often died violently. Their existence was a brutal cycle of bloodshed until luck or age failed them. Historical accounts of medieval mercenary companies include references to quiet men with dead eyes, specializing in killing enemy centurions or officers, probably former assassins who had found no other way. The bodies of captured or dead assassins suffered particular indignities. While common criminals could be executed and buried, assassins were often quartered and their remains displayed at city gates or crossroads as a warning. Some were preserved using rudimentary embalming methods, allowing their corpses to serve as a cautionary display for months or years. Others were burned completely and their ashes scattered to prevent any dignified burial. Medieval belief held that such treatment denied rest to the soul, a fitting punishment for those who had deprived others of their natural life. For the most notorious assassins, death did not bring oblivion, but a dark fame. Their names and exploits passed into folklore, often distorted and exaggerated with each new version. These stories rarely captured the stark reality of the desperation, manipulation, and disposability that defined their real lives. Instead, they became cautionary tales, or, worse still, romantic figures who inspired others to follow similar paths, perpetuating cycles of violence and exploitation. Perhaps the cruelest consequence was erasure of their identity. Most of the assassins died, not only physically, but also historically, without name, without record, forgotten. Their employers sought to eliminate all evidence linking them to murders. Documents were destroyed, witnesses silenced, and records altered. Even when the assassination became part of historical records, the assassin remained anonymous or given a false identity. These men lived and died as shadows. Their existence was recognized only at the moment of violence that defined them. Thus, the medieval assassin story does not end with glory or wealth, but betrayal, abandonment, and oblivion. They were never romantic heroes of modern fiction, but disposable weapons in power games beyond their control. Once their brief usefulness ended, they were discarded without ceremony or consideration. Their only lasting impact was the waves of political change that their deaths unleashed. Changes that they rarely lived to witness themselves, and that they would not have understood even if they had. Time can transform the darkest truths into the most seductive myths. Nowhere is this more evident than in how we remember medieval assassins today. The ruthless, desperate, and ultimately expendable assassins of history have been reborn in our collective imagination as something completely different. Master warriors with incredible skills, noble motives, and romantic lives. This transformation reveals more about our modern sensibility than historical reality. The word assassin comes from the Hashishin, that secret sect of Nazarius Meles, whose assassins sowed terror in the hearts of rulers throughout the Middle East during the Crusades. However, even this famous group of medieval assassins has been completely mythologized. Modern entertainment portrays them as an organized brotherhood of philosophical assassins with elaborate training, ritual traditions, and a complex moral code. The historical reality was far more pragmatic. Religious devotees willing to die for their cause, using simple disguises and direct methods instead of acrobatics or exotic weapons. The medieval chronicles themselves contributed to creating this myth. Christian writers embellished the stories of the Hashishin, describing paradisiacal gardens where recruits were drugged and shown visions of heaven. Muslim accounts emphasize their seemingly supernatural abilities to penetrate heavily guarded fortresses. Both sides exaggerated to explain how these assassins managed to triumph against all odds. The prosaic truth that social invisibility and simple determination could overcome most security seemed insufficient to explain their effectiveness. The Renaissance saw the first idealization of the assassin in European literature. Political assassinations were reframed as necessary sacrifices for the common good. The tyrannical were portrayed as heroes instead of assassins. Machiavelli's writings on the usefulness of selective assassination for political stability contributed to transforming the image of assassins, who went from being criminals to pragmatic tools of the art of governing. The assassin began a slow evolution from despised murderer to necessary shadow warrior. In the 19th century, Gothic literature adopted the assassin as a typical, mysterious, skilled, and exotic character. The Oriental fascination of the time painted assassins as masters of esoteric Oriental arts instead of desperate men with daggers. Thus, Walter Scott's novels starring assassins gave them tragic backgrounds and complex motivations. The disposable tools of medieval power were reinvented as melancholic anti-heroes with their own moral codes. Modern entertainment has completed this transformation. Video games present assassins as protagonists with superhuman abilities, elaborate training systems, and secret societies with resources rivaling those of nations. Movies portray them as martial arts masters with access to cutting-edge technology and global support networks. These fictional assassins retire to peaceful lives when their work is done, having accumulated wealth and wisdom throughout their bloody careers. This romantic vision bears almost no resemblance to historical reality. Medieval assassins were not trained from childhood in secret mountain fortresses. They were not masters of dozens of weapons and fighting styles. They did not have networks of informants, support teams, or elaborate escape plans. They were not rich, respected, or free to choose their targets based on moral considerations. The historical truth is far darker and more human. They were desperate people exploited by power, used for deadly purposes, then discarded. Their training focused on creating obedience rather than excellence. Their methods were direct and simple rather than elaborate. Their rewards were scarce, if any. Their endings were often violent and premature. Their legacy was deliberate oblivion, not a legendary status. Why is this transformation important? Because myths shape how we understand power and violence today. The idealized assassin reinforces the idea that expert violence can solve complex problems, that killing key people can predictably change history. It suggests that those who practice such violence can remain psychologically intact, morally complex individuals who maintain control over their destiny. Reality tells a different story. Medieval assassinations often produced unintended consequences. Power vacuums were filled by equally problematic successors or martyrs whose deaths strengthened the causes they opposed. The assassins themselves were traumatized, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed by their participation in political violence. Far from being masters of their destiny, they were disposable assets in games played by others. Perhaps most importantly, the mythification of assassins obscures the human cost of political violence. Real assassination was not a clean and skillful art, but a bloody and messy affair that destroyed not only the target, but the assassin too. Historical accounts do not describe elegant warriors in the shadows, but broken people who sold their humanity for promises that were rarely kept, who died painfully and in solitude, and whose names were deliberately forgotten. The few medieval assassins whose names have survived in the historical records, Hassani Sabah, who led the Hashishin, or Balthazar Gerard, who killed William the Taciturn, are not remembered for their skills or success, but for the political earthquakes that their actions caused. They were pebbles that triggered avalanches, and their personal destinies were insignificant compared to the changes they set in motion. Perhaps here lies the only real parallel between the myth and reality of the medieval assassin. Both were ultimately defined not by who they were, but by what they did, by that single violent moment that briefly but permanently connected them to history. The difference is that our myths give them an agency, a skill and purpose that their historical counterparts never possessed. The reality of the medieval assassin remains a sobering counterpoint to our modern fascination with skilled, principled killers. They were not masters, but victims of their bloody trade. They were not heroes, but tools. They were not legends of their time, but deliberately forgotten footnotes. Their true legacy is not the romantic myth we have created, but the harsh lesson that their lives and deaths offer. That those who wield violence in the name of the powerful rarely escape its consequences, and that those who kill for others often die for them as well. Hello, guys. Tonight we delve into the chaotic, wine-soaked halls of medieval royalty. But not as a king, a knight, or nobleman. No, you will be the jester, the fool, the one who could mock a monarch to his face and perhaps live to see the next dawn. Movies love to paint jesters as comical, extravagant characters. Floppy hats, witty rhymes, maybe a solo looting or two. But the truth is that the life of jesters was much more brutal. Imagine being a walking escape valve for royal egos. One badly told joke, and what you hear is not laughter, but the sound of shackles or something worse. So, before you settle in, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy the dark corners of history that we explore here. And let me know in the comments where you are watching us from and what time it is. I love to see how far the madness goes. All right, lights off, volume up. Let's begin tonight's strange and dangerous journey into the twisted world of the medieval jester. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your only purpose in life is to be the object of mockery. Not with you, but of you. Welcome to the strange and often terrifying life of a medieval jester, where your entire existence revolves around one simple rule: be funny or die. You're not a person. You're a walking stress toy with jingle bells. The king has had a bad day. You better make him laugh. The queen is bored. Dance, jester. Dance. You exist only for the entertainment of others, which might seem like a modern celebrity's life, but with one key difference. Failure meant much more than just bad reviews. You were chosen for this honor for one of three reasons. Either you were witty and quick with jokes, you were born with some physical oddity people found funny, or you were simply desperate enough to accept the only job available. Congratulations on your professional choice. What makes your position truly strange is the contradiction that defines it. You are invisible, yet constantly observed. When you're not acting, it is as if you don't exist. No one asks you how your day was or what you think of politics. But the moment you enter the scene, all eyes follow your every movement. All ears sharpen to hear your words, and all minds judge if you deserve to remain there. The true irony: you exist for everyone's entertainment, except for your own. Your jokes make others laugh, while you calculate if that laughter was sincere enough for you to eat tonight. Your ridiculous dances entertain the court, while your feet bleed in those ridiculous pointed shoes. Your witty observations make the nobles feel intelligent, while you carefully avoid saying anything that could cost you your head. Welcome to life as medieval entertainment. I hope you enjoy being the human joke. Nothing reveals your true condition in the court like banquet time. Imagine this. The great hall is full of nobles who gorge on roasted meats and fine wines. The air smells of food, sweat, and desperation. The latter comes mainly from you. Mealtime is showtime, and you're the only one in the room less respected than the bones thrown to dogs. While the others sit and eat, you perform. You juggle apples between courses. You mock the nobles just enough to make them laugh, but not so much as to anger them. You tell dirty jokes that make the king laugh and the queen pretend offense. And all this time you're starving because you don't eat until the entertainment is over, and sometimes not even then. Reading the king's mood becomes your most important skill for survival. Is he in a good mood? Then maybe you can push that joke a little further. Is he frowning while drinking his wine? Then maybe today is not the day to make fun of his new crown. A bad joke means no dinner. A too witty joke that implies the king is not as intelligent as you may mean a knight in the dungeon. The drunker the nobles get, the more dangerous your job becomes. They laugh louder, but they get angry faster. If you're lucky, they throw food at you. Sometimes they throw glasses, knives, or punches at you. And you are expected to accept it all with a smile because, well, that's what jesters do. Every laugh you provoke is like flipping a coin. Heads, you get approval and maybe some leftovers from the table. Tails, you get humiliation or something worse. And you flip that coin hundreds of times a day with your stomach rumbling and your dignity dwindling. The banquet ends. The nobles stagger to bed with full stomachs. And you pick up the food from your disguise and wonder if tomorrow's performance will be your last. They called it freedom of expression, the great privilege of the court jester. While everyone else had to measure their words carefully in the presence of royalty, you supposedly could speak truth to power. What they forgot to mention was the small print. Freedom of expression until suddenly it violently stopped being so. Imagine this twisted agreement. The king sits on his throne, surrounded by nobles who nod at every word he utters. They are powerful people who own land, lead armies, and control wealth. However, none of them dares to tell the king that his new fiscal plan is crushing the peasants or that his military strategy is doomed to failure. That dangerous task falls on you, the jester with your colorful suit. Your supposed freedom to tell the truth makes you valuable and completely expendable. One day you could save the kingdom by making the king laugh at his own absurd idea until he abandons it. The next day you could find yourself chained for choosing the wrong time to be honest. Your value lies in that thin space between useful information and punishable offense. The cruelest thing is that you become a political weapon. The king uses you to probe dangerous ground. He allows you to mock a visiting diplomat to see how he reacts under pressure. He encourages you to joke about a noble he suspects of treason, watching his face for signs of guilt. You launch the insults that the king cannot utter, becoming his verbal assassin. Then comes the inevitable betrayal. When the joke goes too far, when the insulted party demands that someone pay for the disrespect, guess who becomes the convenient scapegoat? Not the king who nodded and winked at you to make the joke, nor the courtiers who laughed with him. Only you, the disposable jester who supposedly acts alone. You are not a man of power. You are a human shield with meshes. Your bells jingle as you dance on the razor's edge between cunning and death. Your words may seem free, but they are the most expensive thing you have, and one day you will pay for them with more than you can't afford. This strange power dynamic has historical roots that go back centuries. In medieval Europe, speaking against the king was treason, punishable by death. However, somehow, the jester emerged as the sole exception to this rule. Kings like Henry VIII of England kept jesters like Will Somers, who could criticize royal decisions when no one else dared. The French court maintained a tradition of jesters who served as a mirror to the king, reflecting truths that would otherwise remain hidden. But this freedom had invisible chains. Let's consider the case of Archbold Armstrong, jester of King James I of England. Armstrong enjoyed a protected status for years, mockingly calling powerful religious figures toads and vipers. His sharp tongue earned him enemies among the nobility. However, the king's favor kept him safe until, suddenly, it stopped doing so. After one too many insults against Archbishop Laud, Armstrong was stripped of his position and expelled from court. His freedom of expression disappeared the moment he truly threatened the power structure. The truth is that your license to joke exists simply as theater, the appearance of honesty in a dishonest world. The king allows you to speak freely not because he values the truth, but because it suits him. Your criticisms make him seem fair and open to his subjects. Your jokes at the expense of his enemies weaken their position without him having to lift a finger. Think about the suit you are wearing, the motley clothes, the ridiculous hat, the bells that announce your presence. This outfit is not just for show. It marks you as someone separate from normal society. It indicates to everyone that your words come from a place outside the usual norms. The suit tells the world, don't take this person seriously. After all, he is nothing more than a jester. This visual reminder of your otherness has a fundamental purpose. It means that when you speak uncomfortable truths, people can laugh at them. The king can listen to your criticisms about his greedy tax collectors and do nothing about it, because the criticisms come wrapped in a joke from a man with ridiculous hat. Your truth becomes deniable the moment it leaves your lips. And what happens on the rare occasions when your words actually change something? When the king follows your advice, disguised as humor, you are never given credit. The king becomes wise by listening to his advisors. The nobles praise his judgment. Meanwhile, you take a back seat, the invisible architect of change, until the next time they need you to entertain. Your position as bearer of truth has another death trap. You must somehow know what truths are acceptable and which will lead to ruin. The politics of the court move mysteriously, with alliances changing overnight and yesterday's favorites becoming today's enemies. You must navigate these treacherous waters with nothing more than your wit to guide you. Say something inappropriate about the queen's family ties, and you could insult a potential ally. Mock the wrong noble, and you could target someone the king secretly respects. If you joke about a military defeat too soon, you could reopen wounds that have not healed. There is no manual for this job. There are no clear limits. You learn by surviving one day after another. Some jesters thrived in this impossible position. Tribule, jester of King Francisco I of Francia, once slapped the king on the butt. When the king threatened to execute him for this insult, Trib supposedly replied that he deserved clemency for confusing the king with the queen. The king, amused by this even greater insult, commuted the death penalty to banishment. Not all jesters were so lucky or clever. The real tragedy is that the more effective you are at telling truth to power, the more dangerous your position becomes. The truly insightful jester creates powerful enemies simply by doing their job well. Those who tell comfortable falsehoods may survive longer than those who tell uncomfortable truths. And so, the system corrupts even the only role that supposedly exists outside its influence. You're not a man of power. You are a human shield with tights. Your bells jingle as you dance on the razor's edge between cunning and death. Your words may seem free, but they're the most valuable thing you own. And one day you will pay for them with more than you can afford. All this talk about telling the truth to power may sound noble. You might even start thinking of jesters as some kind of medieval heroes of freedom of expression. It's time to face reality. Death was always just one bad joke away. History books rarely focus on the jesters who suddenly disappeared from court records. Those who made a joke at dinner and were never seen again. Those who went too far and discovered exactly how far their supposed immunity went. But these missing jesters were as much a part of court life as the famous ones who lived to an old age. Let's take the case of Klausner, a Saxon court jester in the early 16th century. When he mocked a powerful nobleman again, he was reportedly locked in a cell and forgotten. No trial, no public punishment, he simply disappeared. Or think of Jane Fool, one of the few female jesters who served Catalina de Aragon, last wife of Enrique VIII. When she made a joke alluding to the king's declining health, she was quickly expelled from court and sent to live in utter poverty. Her crime? Telling an uncomfortable truth. Medieval courts were violent places where justice was meted out quickly and often lethally. Even for nobles, punishment could be sudden and extreme. For a low-ranking jester, there were even fewer protections. That immunity of supposedly magical gestures only existed in the king's mind, and minds can change in an instant. The intelligent jesters learned to read the environment with supernatural precision. You had to perceive when the king's laughter was genuine and when it was growing anger. You had to detect the blush of anger on a duke's face before it became an order for your beating. It was necessary to feel the change of mood when a political alliance shifted overnight, turning yesterday's acceptable target into today's protected favorite. An especially dangerous moment was the transition between rulers. When a king died and a new one ascended to the throne, the court jester found himself on unstable ground. The new ruler could keep him as a link to the past, or consider him a reminder of his predecessor and get rid of him. The jesters who had mocked the new king when he was just a prince often saw their careers end abruptly once power changed hands. Life at court was also physically dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with royal displeasure. Drunk nobles could decide it was fun to use you to practice with a sword. Visiting dignitaries could be offended by your foreign accent or strange appearance. Rival artists could spread rumors about you to secure their own positions. And all this in an era without police protection, labor rights, or even basic medical care. The physical demands of the job itself could prove deadly. Jesters were often expected to perform acrobatics, juggle dangerous objects, handle trained animals, and even swallow fire. One false move could mean breaking your neck in a fall, being attacked by a train bear, or suffering severe burns from a fire-eating trick that went wrong. Unlike modern artists, they had no safety net, no understudy, no insurance policy. Even if they survived the physical risks, the constant pressure took its toll. Jesters lived with crushing anxiety, not knowing if that day's performance would be their last. Many turned to alcohol to calm their nerves or numb the pain of injuries. Others developed strange tics and manias due to the constant stress. Some documented cases described jesters who ended up losing the ability to distinguish between their character and true self, trapped forever in a role from which they could no longer escape. And in exchange for what? A bed in a drafty castle and food when you please the king. Perhaps a small wage that barely covered the cost of maintaining your suit. Some occasional gift when you performed especially well. But never security, never respect, never the certainty that the next day you would be safe. Your immunity was imaginary. Your protection existed only in the realm of tradition and royal whim. If the king changed his mood, so did your fortune. You lived to make others laugh, and You could die simply because someone important had a bad day. This precarious existence had a psychological cost that few modern people can imagine. Every moment of the day required calculation and acting. Every joke was a bet with your life. Each day brought with it the question, will today be the day my luck runs out? Will this be the joke that kills me? The truly sad thing. Historical records suggest that many jesters effectively died for their art, not in a glorious martyrdom for the truth, but in a small and forgotten way. Beaten by the guards for a misinterpreted joke, exiled to poverty for a moment of misjudgment, silently executed when they became inconvenient to power. These deaths rarely made it into the chronicles. These managers disappeared from history as easily as they had disappeared from court. You lived to make people laugh, and you could die for a bad vibe. It wasn't a career. It was a prolonged death sentence with occasional applause. Under the colorful suit and behind the painted smile lived a person that no one really saw. Take off the motley clothes, wash off the makeup, silence the bells, and you will find the saddest man in the room. The jester's loneliness was a special kind of isolation. You existed in a strange limbo between two worlds. You were not of the nobility, but you lived among them. You were not a common servant, but you did serve. You were allowed into the most elitist spaces of the kingdom, but you did not belong anywhere. They listened to you, but never truly heard you. Think about what this meant in your daily life. You ate at the king's table, but only after acting to earn a living. You slept in the castle, but often in small, cold rooms near the servants. You traveled with the royal retinue, but you rode in the back with the luggage. You were both part of the group and a stranger, privileged yet powerless, visible but invisible. This in-between existence made it almost impossible to establish normal human relationships. The nobles saw you as entertainment, not a potential friend. The servants often resented your special status or feared relating to someone so close to power. Even other artists, such as musicians or actors, kept their distance, aware that the jester walked a particularly dangerous path and that romantic relationships were almost non-existent for court jesters. Few parents wanted their daughter to wed the king's jester. There were few prospects within the castle walls. Some historical records mention jesters who married and had families, but they were rare exceptions. Most lived a life of emotional loneliness, finding brief comfort in fleeting relationships, but never the stability of a real partner. Then, there was the emotional burden of the role itself. The constant pressure to perform crushed your authentic self. You were never allowed to have a bad day, nor were you allowed to show genuine anger or sadness. Your emotions did not belong to just you. They belonged to your audience alone. If the king wanted to laugh, you laughed even if your heart was breaking. If the court needed distraction from bad news, you danced even if your own worries consumed you. This performance never ceased. Even in supposedly private moments, you could be called upon to entertain unexpected guests. Even during an illness, you were expected to recover for important occasions. Even during a personal tragedy, your pain took a back seat to professional obligations. You didn't just have a job. You were, in fact, the job. The psychological wear of this existence was immense. Historical accounts describe jesters who developed strange habits, such as talking to themselves, having tics, or becoming obsessively superstitious. Others fell into deep melancholy when alone. The constant contrast between their public persona and private despair was too much to bear. Some accounts mention jesters who simply disappeared, presumably fleeing their gilded cage in search of freedom, however humble. Perhaps the cruelest aspect was loss of identity. Who were you really beneath the disguise? After years of playing the fool, where did the performance end and the real person begin? Many jesters ended up losing this distinction. The mask merged with their face permanently. The role consumed them until nothing was left of who they had been. Even your talent was warped by your position. If you were witty by nature, that wit became a weapon in court politics. If you had physical gifts, your body became a tool in service of others. If you had a beautiful singing voice, it was not for your own expression, but to satisfy the king's desire for entertainment. Everything that made you special became a commodity and the property of others. The gradual erosion of self manifested in small, daily humiliations. Having to laugh when nobles made fun of your appearance. Being forced to eat leftovers while others feasted. Being called the fool instead of your name. Feeling disgust in the third person while you were right there. That they touched, pushed, or handled you without your consent, as if you were an object instead of a person. Age brought its own terrors with it. Unlike expert artisans, who could practice their craft until old age, jesters depended on their agility, wit, and often youthful appearance. What happened when the knees failed after years of acrobatics? When the voice broke and reflexes slowed? Few kings kept aging jesters out of sentiment. Most were simply replaced by younger, more entertaining models, discarded after years of loyal service. For many, the jester's path ended in poverty and oblivion. After decades living in palaces, you could find yourself without savings or practical skills. Your fame would not open any doors in the outside world. Your specialized talents had little application beyond the court. Even your connections brought more danger than advantages, since associating with a deposed jester could be politically risky. Everyone saw the jester. No one saw the person. You made everyone laugh, but died in anonymity. This was the true tragedy of the court jester, living a life so dedicated to spectacle that even you began to forget that there was more to you than the jingle of bells and jokes. In the end, you were not even granted a dignified death. Historical accounts show that even the funerals of court jesters sometimes became spectacles with comic epitaphs or gestural references. Your entire existence, from the first bow to the last breath, was filtered through the prism of entertainment. Even in death, you were still the punchline to someone's joke. If you think medieval jesters disappeared with the last royal courts, think again. The bells may have fallen silent, but the role lives on in different forms. The modern world has simply repackaged court gestures for modern consumption. Just take a look at the current entertainment landscape. Comedians on late-night shows walk a tightrope of political satire, telling uncomfortable truths, but always with a punchline to soften the blow. One joke too many, one misstep in interpreting the atmosphere, and their career is over overnight. Their immunity is as imaginary as any medieval jesters. Social media personalities build entire brands based on being outrageous, saying what others don't dare, and pushing boundaries to get likes and views. They exist in that same dangerous space between the truth-teller and the jester, between the valued voice and disposable entertainment. When they fall from grace, the public forgets them as quickly as any medieval court forgot its deposed jester. Professional comedians face the same paradox as jesters of centuries ago. They are expected to make us laugh with uncomfortable truths, to mock the powerful, to say the unspeakable. However, they must know exactly where the invisible line is. If they are too cautious, they come across as boring. If they are too dangerous, they become untouchable. The razor's edge does not dull with time. Even in office environments, there are designated jokers. The person who lightens tense meetings, who dares tell the boss what others don't, who uses humor to calm conflicts. These gestures in the workplace operate with the same tacit understanding. Your ability to make people laugh gives you special privilege until, suddenly, it doesn't. The psychological wear and tear is similar too. How many comedians have spoken about depression, about the disconnection between their public image and their private reality? How many artists struggle with the pressure to always be on, to never have a bad day, to exist primarily for the entertainment of others? The painted smile hides the same pain, whether literal or metaphorical. Digital content creators experience the unique loneliness of being surrounded by an audience, but fundamentally alone. They share intimate details of their lives with millions, but they don't really know any of them. They are hyper-visible and completely invisible. The medieval jester would immediately recognize this strange isolation. Even physical risks have modern parallels. Specialists, extreme athletes, and reality show contestants push their bodies to the limit for our entertainment. They risk injury and, sometimes, death to amaze and amuse us. When they break or stop being funny, they're discarded without much thought for their well-being. The economic system has evolved, but the fundamental agreement has not. The modern artist continues to exchange dignity for attention, authenticity for approval, and physical security for economic opportunities. The palace may have become a studio or a social media platform, but the transaction remains the same. Make them laugh or suffer the consequences. Perhaps most disturbing is how we now all participate in this system. In a world of personal brands and constant performance on social media, we all feel pressure to entertain. We all know the emotion of likes and the pain of being ignored. Everyone understands what it means to create a public image that may have little to do with private reality. The jester's dilemma has been democratized. Act or perish. Be interesting or be invisible. Dance to earn your bread or go hungry. The bells are now notification sounds. The circus has become curated feeds, but the dance remains essentially the same. This is not to say that entertainment is intrinsically exploitative or that making others laugh is shameful. Joy and humor are vital human needs. The problem arises when entertainment becomes one-sided, when the artist becomes disposable, when the human being behind the performance disappears into his role. What can we learn from the plight of the medieval jester? Perhaps see the person behind the performance. To remember that our comedians, influencers, and artists are first and foremost human beings, not emotional workers who exist solely for our entertainment. To understand that freedom of expression has always been accompanied by invisible conditions, and that those who seem to speak more freely often pay the highest price. The next time you see a comedian pushing the boundaries,